Before we get started, please like and subscribe. Let me know where you're watching from, and you can support the channel by clicking thanks or joining. The first time I realized something was wrong in my bedroom, it was not because of the whispering, the shadows, or even the cold spots that formed at strange hours of the night. It was because of the writing on my wall, 4 simple words that did not belong to anyone living. I know your secrets. The message had been carved into the paint above my headboard, etched so deeply that flakes of white dust covered my pillow. I stared at it for a long time that morning, trying to convince myself it was a prank or something I had done in my sleep without remembering. But the carving was too precise, too deliberate, and certainly too calm to have been made by a frantic dreamer. I ran my fingers over the grooves. The cuts were clean, straight. They had been carved by someone holding a sharp object, someone who had stood only inches above my sleeping face. My stomach twisted. I checked every corner of the room, every window lock, every inch of the carpet. Nothing was disturbed. No signs of entry, no footprints on the floor, no smudges on the doorknob. The security camera in the living room had recorded nothing unusual the night before, only the soft hum of the refrigerator and the slow flickering of the night light I tended to leave on. But there was no camera in my bedroom. That morning I left for work with a constant buzzing in my chest, like my body was warning me of something I could not yet understand. I told myself it was stress or lack of sleep or the lingering grief of losing my father earlier that year. Anything but the thought that someone had entered my room and stood next to me without my knowledge. When I returned home that evening, the house was still. Too still. The air felt heavy, like someone had been holding their breath for hours. I hesitated before turning on the hallway light. For a moment, I felt as if something stood just behind me, leaning close enough to study the back of my neck. I ignored it. I had to. If I didn't, I knew panic would take over, and I might never step foot inside again. I made myself dinner. I turned on the television. I tried to wash dishes, but my hands shook so badly I had to set the plate down. All the while, the words on my bedroom wall burned in my memory. I know your secrets. What secrets? I was an ordinary person. I went to work at a small accounting firm. I came home to an empty house. I rarely spoke to anyone outside of work. The thought that someone had taken the time to watch me, study me, and carve those taunting words felt impossible, maddening. When I finally entered my bedroom again that night, the carving seemed deeper than I remembered, almost darker, as if the cuts themselves absorbed the light. I turned away quickly and crawled into bed, pulling the blanket over my shoulders like a shield. Sleep came slowly, dragging me into uneasy dreams where the house breathed and the walls whispered my name. I woke 3 times in a cold sweat before finally falling into a deeper sleep just before dawn. And that was when I heard it, a soft scratching sound, like a nail against painted wood. I shot upright in bed, pulse pounding in my throat. The sound continued, slow and deliberate, coming from the wall directly behind my head. Scratch, pause, scratch, scratch, pause. Then a whisper followed, a soft exhale, a voice barely forming shape. I am here. I froze. My body refused to move, as if it knew something my mind refused to accept. The scratching resumed, This time it traced a pattern along the wall, slow arcs and straight, deliberate lines. I forced myself to turn on the lamp. The scratching stopped instantly. The wall behind me was untouched. The carving remained the same, no new marks, but the dust on my pillow was disturbed, as if someone had brushed their fingers through it moments before I turned on the light. I did not sleep for the rest of the night. When the sun finally rose, I left the house and stayed at a cafe for hours, unable to bring myself to return. My thoughts spiraled. Had someone been inside the walls? Was there a crawl space, a hidden vent, a opening I had never noticed? Or was something worse happening? Something that did not require physical doors, something that already lived inside the structure of the house, using it the way a puppeteer used strings. That night, when I forced myself to return home, the moment I stepped inside, I felt the shift. The air moved, as if something brushed past me. I flicked on the hallway light. A new message had been carved in the plaster, directly beside the first. I watch you sleep. I stumbled backward until my shoulders hit the door. My hands trembled violently. This was no prank, no forgotten action, no trick of memory. Someone or something entered my room every night, and now it wanted me to know. I forced myself to step forward, my breath sharp and shallow. The writing was still fresh, flakes of paint scattered on the floor. My throat tightened. Someone had carved this less than an hour ago. I checked the windows. Locked. I checked the doors. Locked. I checked every room. Empty. But when I stepped back into the hallway, a new sound broke the silence. A slow, steady tapping coming from inside my bedroom, and then a whisper floated out, carried on a cold breath that did not belong to me. Do you want to know who I am? The house exhaled, and the wall moved. The night after I discovered the first message on my bedroom wall settled over the house, with a weight that felt unnatural, as if the air itself resisted every breath. My room remained cold even with the heater running, and the walls seemed to hold a faint hum, almost like a low tremor echoing beneath the plaster. I tried to pretend nothing had changed, yet every sound reminded me that someone or something knew my secrets and had written them where I slept. The tension tightened around my chest as I replayed the memory of the words scrawled across the wall in dark strokes that did not smear when touched. I stayed awake far longer than I intended, watching the shadows lift and fold across the corners of my room, wondering if the silent stranger who invaded my life might return. I sat on my bed with the lamp glowing softly beside me. The light wrapped the room in a weak halo that only seemed to deepen the darkness rather than disperse it. I looked toward the far wall again, half expecting to see a new message appear out of nothing, though I had scrubbed away every trace of the first message earlier that morning. I could still sense its presence, as though the wall remembered every letter etched into it. The quiet pulsed around me, and my ears strained to catch anything that might hint at movement. My heart dragged through every beat as I watched the night stretch on. It was close to 2 in the morning when I heard the first sound. A faint tap, then another, each spaced evenly apart, as if someone touched the wall with deliberate patience. I held my breath and waited, The tapping continued with a rhythmic persistence that made the hair rise on my arms. The sound was coming from behind the very wall where the message had been written. I approached slowly, my footsteps sinking into the carpet as if muffled by something unseen. I rested my palm against the wall. The surface felt cold enough to sting. Another tap struck directly beneath my hand. The force vibrated into my skin. My pulse stumbled. I stepped back, shaking. The tapping stopped. I stared at the wall for nearly a minute, afraid to blink in case something appeared while I looked away. When nothing happened, I retreated to the bed and pulled the blankets around my shoulders. For a moment, the silence returned, but then the air shifted, and I felt a slow presence gather in the room. It felt like someone watching me from just beyond the edge of sight. My throat tightened. I scanned the room again and again until my eyes burned. When I finally lay down, exhaustion crashed over me like a wave. Sleep came in jagged pieces that never settled into something peaceful. In one moment I drifted, and in the next, a sharp sound snapped me awake. I jerked upright and saw a faint outline on the wall. A shape was forming. I rubbed my eyes, certain it was only a trick of fatigue. But when the haze cleared, letters had begun to appear across the wall in dark lines. They stretched with unnatural smoothness, as if written by an invisible hand moving with steady purpose. My chest seized in terror. The letters spelled out a memory I had never shared with anyone. A moment buried deep inside me, something painful that I had sworn I would never speak aloud. Yet the wall knew, the stranger knew. My fingers trembled as I stood. I wanted to run, but my legs felt locked in place. The writing finished itself in a final slow stroke as the air thickened with a pressure that made it hard to breathe. I backed away until I hit the edge of the bed. Suddenly, the temperature plunged. My breath fogged in front of me. The lamp flickered, then went out. The room drowned in darkness so complete that I could not see my own hands. I reached for my phone, but before my fingers touched it, I heard something new, breathing, not my own, slow and steady, drawn from a chest that felt too close to mine. The sound hovered at the center of the room. Each inhale scraped like something learning how to breathe. My skin crawled. I dared not move. The breathing grew louder, shifting as if the owner of the sound changed position. I felt the weight of eyes watching me. I fought the urge to scream. Slowly the breathing faded until only silence remained. The lamp flickered back to life. The warmth returned to the room, but the writing on the wall remained as dark and sharp as if carved by a blade. I forced myself to walk toward it. Each word cut into me as I read. My legs weakened and I sank to the floor. Someone understood me in ways I wished no one ever would. Someone reached into my memories and pulled out the parts I hid from myself. And that someone stood in my room only moments ago, leaving no footprint, no sound except the echo of their breathing. I pressed my palms to my eyes and tried to steady my thoughts. I looked around the room once more. Everything appeared normal. The shadows stayed still. The walls were quiet. yet nothing felt the same. The stranger who wrote my secrets on my bedroom wall had returned, and this time they left a message that made one truth undeniable. They were not finished with me. The morning after the second message appeared on my bedroom wall began with a heaviness that clung to my skin like damp air trapped beneath a low cloud. I had barely slept, drifting in and out of fractured dreams shaped by the cold breathing that had filled my room only hours earlier. When sunlight finally pressed through the blinds, I felt no relief. Instead, the pale light washed over the writing on the wall, sharpening every letter until it looked carved rather than drawn. I stood there staring at the message as if trying to will it into disappearing. But the more I looked, the more undeniable it became. Whoever the stranger was, they wanted me to know they could reach me whenever they chose. They wanted me to feel exposed, vulnerable, and watched. I forced myself to leave the room and go downstairs. The familiar creak of the wooden steps under my weight should have comforted me, yet each sound felt amplified in a way that reminded me of being followed. I hesitated in the kitchen doorway, half expecting to find someone waiting for me in the corner. The room was empty, but a vague sensation of being observed lingered like a faint smell you cannot quite place. I pressed my palms against the counter to steady myself and tried to gather the courage to face the day. Every instinct begged me to run, but run to where? Stranger knew my secrets. They knew my house. They knew me. Distance would not save me. As I prepared coffee, I noticed movement in the reflection of the microwave door. A subtle shift, a shadow where none should be. I turned quickly, heart pounding, but the room remained still. The silence settled again. I exhaled slowly, realizing how deeply the night had carved itself into my nerves. I carried the mug into the living room and sat on the couch, gripping it with both hands. The warm ceramic pressed into my palms, grounding me just enough to keep from unraveling. I stared ahead without focus until a different kind of realization crept into my mind. The stranger had not just written my secrets, they had written them in the one place I could not avoid. My bedroom, the room where I slept, the room where I felt most unguarded. The thought made my breath hitch. It was not simply about revealing what I hid. It was about claiming space in my life, reminding me that my privacy had never been mine to protect. Whoever they were, they wanted to erase the boundary between themselves and my most personal thoughts. I set the mug down and returned upstairs. Each step felt heavier than the last. When I reached the bedroom door, I hesitated, as though crossing the threshold would invite the stranger back. I pushed the door open slowly. The writing remained exactly as I left it, untouched, unchanged. Waiting, I forced myself to examine the letters more closely. They were too smooth, too precise, as though created by something that did not rely on physical tools. I brushed my fingers along the lines. The surface was completely flat, though the writing looked etched deep. A chill rippled through me. I backed away, but stopped suddenly when I noticed something new. a faint scratch near the baseboard. I crouched down to inspect it. The mark was thin but intentional, following the grain of the wood in a direction that suggested deliberate pressure. I touched it lightly. The groove felt fresh. The stranger had been here recently, maybe only minutes before I woke. My stomach twisted. I rose quickly and stepped away from the wall, scanning every corner of the room for further signs. A second mark appeared near the closet door, then another along the side of the desk, each thin, precise, and impossible to explain. My pulse quickened as I crossed the room. When I reached the closet, I hesitated. The memory of breathing in the darkness returned so vividly that I felt it on my skin. I reached for the handle, pausing only to steady my breath, then pulled the door open. The space inside looked normal. Clothes hung neatly, shoes rested beneath them. Nothing appeared disturbed, yet something felt wrong. The air inside the closet was colder than the rest of the room, much colder. I leaned in slightly. That was when I saw it, a single line drawn along the back wall. But this one was different from the marks on the bedroom walls. This one curved, almost like the beginning of a letter or symbol. I blinked, unsure whether my mind filled in shapes out of fear. But when I drew closer, the form sharpened into clarity. Someone had started writing something new inside the closet. They had begun, but not finished. Why? What had interrupted them? A sudden sound echoed from downstairs. A soft thud. My body tensed instantly. I stepped back from the closet and listened intently. Another sound followed, slow, weighty, as though someone walked just beyond the staircase. I moved to the hallway and peered down. Sunlight illuminated the lower floor, but no movement appeared. I gripped the railing and descended each step with deliberate quiet, my breath shallow. The sound repeated again, this time from the direction of the dining room. I approached cautiously. When I reached the doorway, I saw nothing unusual at first, but then I noticed something on the table, a piece of paper. My heartbeat quickened as I stepped closer. The paper lay perfectly centered, as though placed with meticulous care. My name was written across the top in the same dark strokes that appeared on my bedroom wall. I swallowed hard and lifted the page with trembling fingers. The message inside was short but devastating. I was here while you slept. My hands shook violently. The paper slid from my grip and drifted to the floor. I backed away, bumping into a chair as panic surged through me. The stranger was not just writing my secrets now, they were escalating. They wanted me to know how helpless I was. They wanted me afraid, and they succeeded. In that moment, I understood something vital. The stranger had no intention of stopping. The messages, the breathing, the scratches on the walls, the unfinished symbols, the note left while I slept, all of it pointed to a single terrifying truth. They were getting closer. By the time afternoon shadows stretched across the walls of my home, a quiet dread settled over me like a second skin. I had spent the earlier hours wandering from room to room, unsure what I expected to find, yet terrified of discovering anything new. The note on the dining table remained burned into my thoughts with a permanence I could not shake. I was here while you slept. The message replayed on a loop. each repetition tightening the fear around my ribs until breathing became an effort. I kept glancing toward the windows, half expecting to see someone watching from outside, but the yard lay empty, the street silent, the air unmoving. The stillness only made the possibility of unseen eyes more suffocating. As the light dimmed, I forced myself upstairs again. My bedroom door waited at the end of the hall like a mouth closed around its secrets. I paused before stepping inside, bracing for whatever I might find. When I pushed the door open, the room met me with a hushed breath of cold air. The writing on the wall remained untouched. The unfinished scratch marks near the floor held their thin, precise lines. Everything looked the same, and yet nothing felt the same. The air carried a tension that made my skin prick. I could almost sense the stranger's presence lingering like heat after a hand leaves your skin. I moved toward the closet, drawn by the half-formed symbol inside. The air grew colder as I approached. My fingers hesitated on the handle before I pulled it open. The curved marking remained etched into the back wall, but now it had grown slightly longer, an additional line extending upward at a sharper angle. Someone had come back to continue writing. My stomach tightened. How long had they been here? Was it while I stood downstairs trying to calm myself? Or had they been in the closet while I moved through the hallway earlier, hidden behind thin wood and silence? The thought made my breath shudder. I stepped back from the closet quickly and turned toward the bed. The blanket lay rumpled from the restless night before. A faint indentation remained near the pillow, but I could not remember whether I had left it that way myself. I touched it slowly. The fabric felt cold, too cold for something that had been resting in sunlight only hours earlier. I pulled my hand back as if burned. The stranger was getting bolder, more present, more deliberate. They wanted me to know that the boundary between us was dissolving. I sat on the edge of the bed, clasping my hands together to keep them from shaking. I tried to reason through everything that had happened. Who could know my secrets? Who would invade my room? Who could write on my walls without leaving footprints, marks, or any hint of physical presence besides the messages themselves? None of it made sense in any human way. The messages were too precise, the breathing too unnatural, the cold too sudden. The stranger felt more like a force, a presence shaped by something I could not explain. A sound interrupted my spiraling thoughts. A light scratch, delicate yet deliberate. It came from the hallway. I froze, listening closely. Another scratch followed, dragging slightly as if a fingertip traced the wall. I rose slowly and moved toward the door, my heart hammering against my ribs. When I reached the threshold, the hallway stood in complete stillness. The setting sun cast thin golden bars across the floor. No shadows moved, no breathing echoed, but the scratch noise had been unmistakable. I stepped into the hall. A soft creak sounded from behind me. I turned sharply. The bedroom door swung inward. Though no breeze touched the air, the door moved with the same slow control as every message written on my walls. I backed away from it, pulse quickening, the door drifted shut, latching with a gentle click. I felt the click reverberate through my chest. Something wanted me out of the bedroom. I moved down the hall, trying to convince myself that leaving the room was the safest choice. But as I reached the top of the stairs, I stopped. At the bottom step sat another piece of paper, perfectly centered, placed with intention. My breath faltered. I descended slowly, each step creaking under my weight. When I reached the note, I hesitated before picking it up. This one held a longer message than the previous note. The writing cut across the page in dark, controlled strokes. You are not alone in your memories. I know the parts you avoid. I watch the moments you try to forget, and I am waiting for the one you fear most. My hands trembled violently as I lowered the note. Waiting for what? What memory did they intend to expose next? The stranger was not only inside my house, they were inside my past, my mind, my silence. I backed away from the stairs, nearly stumbling as I reached the bottom. My vision blurred around the edges as panic surged through me. Suddenly, a loud thud echoed from somewhere above. My body jolted. I turned toward the ceiling, listening. Another thud followed, heavier than the first. Then a dragging sound, slow and scraping. It traced across the floor of my bedroom directly above me. I imagined the stranger moving through the space, tracing their fingers along the walls, writing new messages in the same smooth, deliberate strokes. The dragging sound stopped. A different noise followed, a soft pressure against the ceiling, almost like a hand pressing down from above. The drywall flexed ever so slightly, the shadow of the indentation visible from where I stood. My breath caught. The stranger was directly above me. I stepped backward until my shoulders pressed against the front door. I considered running outside, fleeing into the open air, escaping the house entirely. But the stranger had already proven they did not rely on walls or locked doors. They would follow. They would appear wherever they wished. Running would not change that. The pressure against the ceiling eased. Silence replaced it, thick and absolute. I remained frozen, eyes fixed upward, waiting for another sign. Minutes stretched until the silence felt unbearable. Finally, I forced myself to move. I approached the staircase again, each step cautious, deliberate. Halfway up, I paused to listen. Nothing stirred. No dragging, no tapping, no breathing, only stillness. When I reached the hallway, the bedroom door stood slightly open again. A thin sliver of darkness leaked from the gap like smoke. I approached with restrained steps, every nerve in my body warning me to turn away. But I had to know what had changed. I pushed the door open wider. A new message waited on the wall. This time it did not reveal a secret. This time it delivered a warning. Do not look for me. I am already closer than that. My legs weakened. My breath wavered. The stranger was not simply haunting my home. They were circling me, tightening their presence, shaping their intrusion into something intimate and terrifying. And with every message, every sound, every cold breath in the dark, one truth grew clearer. They did not intend to remain a stranger for long. Evening settled over the house like a curtain made from something thicker than night. The air carried a faint metallic taste. as though the walls themselves exhaled a warning I could not decipher. I moved through the living room in slow, measured steps, trying to convince myself that staying aware would somehow protect me, though deep down I knew awareness alone offered nothing. Whatever the stranger was, they had already invaded my home, my thoughts, my memories, and now their presence hovered just beyond the edges of perception, like a shadow waiting for a shape to inhabit. The message on my bedroom wall looped in my mind with suffocating clarity. Do not look for me. I am already closer than that. Every time I replayed the sentence, the words folded in on themselves, forming implications I could not ignore. Closer than what? Closer than sight. Closer than breath. The stranger had written that warning with deliberate precision, as though guiding me toward a realization I had not yet reached. I paced the lower floor restlessly. I checked the locks on every door twice before checking them again, even though logic insisted the stranger did not rely on doors to enter. Still, the ritual of turning the deadbolt brought the illusion of control. Illusion was all I had left. Outside, the final traces of daylight dissolved into muted purples and cold blues. The windows reflected my face back at me in warped fragments. Behind my reflection, the rooms looked deeper than they should, shadows stretching with unnatural patience. I avoided looking too long. Eventually, I drifted into the dining room. The two notes that had appeared earlier lay stacked neatly on the table. I had not touched them since the afternoon. I did not want to feel the texture of the paper again or see the sharpness of the ink that refused to smear beneath my fingertips. Yet the notes drew my attention like magnets. I sat down across from them and stared until my eyes blurred. The moment stretched until the silence began to pulse. A sudden vibration trembled through the table. I jerked upright. The surface rippled slightly, though nothing touched it. My breath caught in my throat. The house fell completely silent again. I rose from the chair and stepped back. The air grew heavier, thickening as though something unseen stepped into the room with me. A faint whisper of cold crawled up my arms. I scanned the corners with frantic eyes. Nothing moved, yet something was there, watching, assessing. The light above the dining table flickered subtly. Once, twice, then steadied. My heartbeat pounded against my ribs. I backed away slowly, retreating into the hallway. As soon as my foot crossed the threshold, a soft creak echoed from upstairs. I froze. The creak came again, then another, heavier this time, as though someone shifted their weight on the bedroom floorboards. Fear surged through me like a jolt of electricity. I stood rooted in place, staring toward the staircase, waiting for the next sound. A long moment passed before another noise drifted down. This one was faint, almost curious, a gentle brushing sound. Fingertips gliding across a wall. The stranger was in the bedroom again, continuing whatever they had begun. The unfinished symbol in the closet, the new warnings, the hidden messages. Their presence grew more confident with each visit. I forced myself forward, though every instinct screamed to run. When I reached the stairs, I hesitated. The air thickened the higher I climbed, a coldness clung to the railing. I ascended slowly, each step creaking under my weight. The brushing sound continued above me, rhythmic and unhurried. Something about the cadence made my stomach It was deliberate, controlled, almost patient. At the top of the stairs, the hallway stretched before me in dim light. The bedroom door stood open wider than before. Darkness pooled inside the room like a quiet lake. I stepped forward cautiously. The brushing sound stopped immediately, as though whatever created it sensed my arrival. Silence descended with a weight that made my ears ring. I reached the doorway and peered inside. At first, nothing stood out. The writing on the wall remained the same ominous presence. The closet door sat half open. The cold air drifted in waves I could almost see. But then I noticed something new at the base of the wall. Another marking, larger this time. A curved line intersecting the earlier scratches, shaping the beginnings of a symbol that seemed impossibly familiar and entirely foreign at the same time. My chest tightened in a mix of confusion and dread. Each new stroke looked like part of a pattern unfolding with purpose. I knelt slowly to inspect it. The surface felt colder than before. My fingertips tingled as though energy pulsed beneath the wood. The marking did not look carved or drawn. It looked grown, as if the wall adjusted itself to reveal the symbol. I stood quickly and stepped away. A soft exhale of cold brushed the back of my neck. I spun around, heart pounding. Nothing stood behind me, nothing visible. The lamp on the bedside table flickered. The light thinned until only a faint golden thread remained. In that dimness, I noticed movement near the closet, a shape shifting behind the clothes. Slow, minimal, but unmistakable. My breath turned shallow. I watched with unblinking eyes as the fabric moved subtly, disturbed by something standing behind it. The lamp flickered again, then steadied. The shape vanished. The air eased only slightly. I approached the closet with trembling steps. My hand hovered over the door, fingers shaking. Before I could touch it, a voice whispered from somewhere inside the darkness. "Do not open this yet." The words slid into the room like cold smoke. They were quiet, almost gentle, but carried a depth that vibrated through my bones. I stumbled backward, nearly losing my balance. The whisper did not repeat itself. The closet remained still. The cold thickened. I fled the room. My steps hammered against the hallway floor as I rushed back downstairs. Only when I reached the living room did I stop. My chest heaved. My hands shook uncontrollably. The whisper had not sounded entirely human. It had texture, a layered resonance that made it feel too close, too intimate. The stranger was not only invading my space, they were beginning to speak directly to me. I sank onto the couch, gripping the armrest with white knuckles. My thoughts spiraled. The stranger knew my secrets. They wrote on my walls. They walked in my room while I slept. They left notes. They pressed against ceilings. They shaped symbols, but speaking to me changed everything. Words required intention, interaction, recognition. They no longer existed at the edges of my life. They were crossing into direct communication, and the whisper carried a warning, not a threat. Not yet. That frightened me more. Warnings implied purpose. Purpose implied a plan, and whatever plan they carried, I sensed it was unfolding faster than I could understand. The house remained silent, but the stranger's final message echoed through my thoughts with chilling clarity. Do not open this yet. Not yet meant soon. Night settled again, heavier than before, as though the house braced itself for what would come next. I moved through each room with a growing sense of inevitability pressing at my ribs. The whisper from the closet echoed in my mind with a clarity that made my skin crawl. Do not open this yet. The words held intention, a deliberate restraint, and the idea that the stranger controlled not only what I saw but what I was allowed to see left my thoughts trembling. I tried to occupy myself in the living room, forcing my attention to the faint hum of the lamp and the shifting glow it cast across the wall. But each time the shadows moved, even slightly, my breath hitched. The house felt charged, as if a storm gathered invisibly in its bones. I could sense the stranger's presence somewhere above me, lingering in the corners I could not see. Not active, not gone, waiting. The unfinished symbol in the closet invaded my thoughts with relentless persistence. Its shape pulled at something deep within my memory, though I could not recognize why. Each new line appeared with intentional progression, almost like pieces of a word, forming in a language I was never meant to understand. I kept imagining the stranger returning to complete it, one careful stroke at a time, writing in the dark behind the hanging clothes while I slept only feet away. Hours passed in thick silence. I found myself glancing repeatedly toward the staircase, expecting movement. Each time, the hallway above lay still, yet the absence of sound felt more threatening than noise. I tried to stay awake, but exhaustion clung to my eyelids. Eventually, I drifted into a shallow, restless sleep on the couch. A cold breeze brushed across my face. My eyes snapped open. At first, I thought I was dreaming. The room was darker than it should have been, the lamplight dim to a low amber pulse. I pushed myself upright slowly, trying not to make noise. That was when I noticed the front door. It stood cracked open by only an inch, just enough to allow a ribbon of cold air to seep into the room. My heart lurched violently. I knew I had locked it. I checked it 3 times. I approached with trembling steps. When I reached the door, I pressed my palm to the wood. It was ice cold. The metal lock felt even colder. I shut the door firmly and slid the deadbolt into place, my fingers shaking so badly that the metal rattled. I turned, breath quick, and scanned the room. Something had entered, or something had left. A creak sounded above me. My chest tightened. Slowly, I looked toward the ceiling. The sound repeated, deliberate, paced, almost like slow footsteps shifting weight from one side to the other. The stranger was upstairs again, directly above the living room. I moved toward the staircase with cautious steps. Halfway up, the air grew colder. The shadows thickened along the walls as though something invisible passed through them. When I reached the top, the hallway stretched ahead in silent darkness. The bedroom door remained open from earlier, a dark mouth in a narrow corridor. The moment I stepped toward it, a faint scratching sound drifted from inside the room. Not hurried, not aggressive, slow, intentional, the same rhythm that accompanied every message the stranger carved into my walls. My legs urged me backward, but some deeper part of me pushed forward against my will. I had to see what they were doing. The room felt colder than the rest of the house, as though winter had seeped into the walls. The lamp flickered weakly, casting erratic beams across the floor. My gaze drifted toward the closet without meaning to, drawn by a gravitational pull I could not resist. The closet door was wide open. Inside, the unfinished symbol stretched larger than before. Now it spanned nearly half the back wall, a twisting curve intersecting sharp, angular strokes, forming a shape that made my pulse quicken. It looked like a letter from an alphabet that did not belong to this world. Beneath it, faint marks covered the floor as though something had been dragged across the wood. I stepped closer, breath trembling. The air inside the closet felt denser, harder to breathe. As I reached the threshold, I froze. A sound rose from behind the clothes. Breathing, not loud, not human, a layered sound, as though several breaths overlapped into one. My skin crawled. The whisper from earlier echoed again in my thoughts. Do not open this yet. A warning, a restraint. Now the door was open because the stranger wanted it open. I stumbled backward just as something shifted behind the hanging shirts. A faint pressure pulsed outward, rippling the air like a silent exhale. The clothes swayed gently as though brushed by unseen fingers. Before I could move, a new line carved itself across the closet wall. Right in front of me, the wall dented inward with unnatural smoothness, forming a stroke that extended the symbol. No hand touched it, no object pressed against it. The wall simply yielded, reshaping itself in response to an invisible force that moved with deliberate precision. I fell to the floor, scrambling backward until my back hit the bed frame. My breath came in sharp, uneven gulps as I watched the line complete itself. The symbol now looked whole, or at least closer to whole, and the moment the carving stopped, the closet fell silent. The breathing ceased. The air settled. Then a voice spoke again, not a whisper this time, a low murmur that resonated through the entire room, vibrating the floor beneath me. It is almost ready. My heart hammered with violent force. The words slid through me like a blade carved from cold air. I could feel the meaning pressing beyond the surface of the language, carrying implications I could not fully perceive. Almost ready. Ready for what? I tried to stand, but my legs wobbled. I reached for the nightstand to steady myself. The lamp flickered again, then shut off completely, plunging the room into darkness. I gasped and stumbled forward, trying to find the doorway. My hand brushed the wall. The cold bit into my skin like ice. Behind me, the closet door slammed shut with a force that shook the floor. I bolted into the hallway, nearly tripping as I descended the stairs. Only when I reached the living room did I stop. Chest heaving, lungs burning, I collapsed onto the couch, gripping the fabric until my knuckles turned white. The stranger was no longer just writing messages or hiding behind walls. They were shaping something, completing something, and whatever the symbol represented, whatever purpose it carried. The stranger spoke of it with the certainty of someone preparing for an arrival or a crossing. "It is almost ready," the words replayed in my mind with relentless clarity. The stranger was not warning me anymore. They were announcing progress. Something was coming, something tied to that symbol. And now the only thing more terrifying than not knowing what it meant was the growing realization that I might find out soon. Morning never truly came. Light reached the windows, but it carried no warmth, no sense of beginning. Instead, it pressed through the glass like a diluted imitation of daylight, pale and drained of life. I woke on the couch with my neck stiff and my breathing shallow, the memory of the stranger's voice vibrating along my ribs. "It is almost ready." The words lingered in the air even after consciousness returned, as though the house itself repeated them in a low, invisible echo. I sat up slowly, listening. The house lay silent, not peaceful, silent in the way a held breath is silent, waiting for something to break the stillness. The cold that had spread through the night remained settled in the walls, seeping into the floorboards. I rubbed my hands together, trying to dispel the sensation, but it clung stubbornly to my skin. Something had changed. I felt it before I understood it. The house no longer felt merely watched. It felt occupied. I stood and moved cautiously toward the hallway. Every step stirred a faint whisper of air, as though the house reacted to my presence. At the bottom of the stairs, I paused. The same coldness that had pressed against the ceiling the night before now drifted downward, settling like a thin veil across the space. My chest tightened in response. The stranger was upstairs again, or still, despite every instinct urging me to stay on the lower floor. I ascended the stairs. The banister felt colder than metal in winter. My fingers recoiled from it. The higher I climbed, the more the air thickened. By the time I reached the top step, breathing felt like inhaling through damp cloth. The hallway stretched ahead, each shadow clinging to the walls with unnatural weight. My bedroom door was closed, though I left it open when I ran the night before. I stared at the doorknob for several seconds, unable to move. The knob gleamed faintly in the dull morning light, as though someone had touched it recently, leaving a sheen that had not yet faded, summoning every ounce of control I had left. I stepped forward and opened the door. The room felt wrong immediately, not colder, not darker, wrong in some fundamental way that my senses could interpret only as dissonance. The furniture sat in the same places. The walls looked unchanged, yet something beneath the surface vibrated with quiet tension, like a string pulled tight. My gaze drifted to the closet. The door stood cracked open by less than an inch. That narrow gap radiated a cold that compressed the air. It felt like standing in front of a doorway leading somewhere farther than physical space allowed. A faint hum rose from inside the closet, low, resonant, like a voice speaking a language too deep to hear properly. I approached slowly, each step crunching softly against the carpet. When I reached the closet, I hesitated. The hum intensified, vibrating against my skin. I pushed the door open and froze. The symbol carved into the back wall now covered nearly the entire surface. It writhed faintly beneath the dim light, not moving, but giving the impression of movement, as though the loops and sharp angles shifted when I blinked. The grooves dug deeper than before, their edges impossibly smooth. A cold haze drifted from the symbol, as though the wall itself exhaled frost. But that was not the worst part. A new message had been carved into the floor, right at the threshold of the closet. Do not step inside. The letters sliced into the wood with precision so exact they looked manufactured. My breath halted. The stranger had never warned me twice before. Their messages increased in intensity, but this felt different. This was protection, or perhaps containment. Before I could respond, a faint rustle echoed behind the hanging clothes. I stumbled back, nearly falling into the dresser. The rustling grew louder, like fabric brushing against something moving deliberately. The clothes trembled slightly, swaying as though something walked slowly behind them. A soft thud struck the inside wall of the closet. Then another, slow, rhythmic, like footsteps testing a boundary. My skin prickled with cold dread. Whatever was behind that symbol was pushing outward. The hum deepened, vibrating the floorboards beneath my feet. The light flickered overhead, throwing warped shadows across the room. The symbol pulsed subtly, as though responding to an unseen heartbeat. I backed toward the bedroom doorway. Before I reached it, the closet door slammed shut with a force so violent it rattled the entire room. I cried out and stumbled backward. The hum ceased instantly. Silence crashed down, heavy and absolute. I bolted into the hallway and nearly fell down the stairs in my panic. When I reached the bottom, I pressed my back against the wall, chest heaving. My pulse thundered in my ears. The coldness that had clung to the upper floor seeped downward, crawling along the walls in slow waves. The stranger was no longer confined to one space. They were expanding. I stumbled into the living room and collapsed onto the couch. My breaths came sharp and fast. I forced myself to listen. At first, there was nothing but my own breathing. Then, faintly, barely audible through the floorboards, came a sound that made my blood turn to ice. Scratching, not random, intentional, slow lines drawn across wood, the same rhythm as every message. They were writing again. My pulse tightened. I swallowed hard, forcing myself not to move, not to breathe too loudly. The scratching continued for several long seconds before falling silent. Then, from directly above me, a soft tapping echoed through the ceiling. 3 taps, a pause, 3 more, a pattern, a signal, a communication. Tears stung my eyes as realization crashed over me. The stranger was not only writing messages, they were responding to my movements, my fear, my presence. They were reacting. The taps ceased. Silence stretched unnaturally. Then a new sound emerged. A whisper so faint it might have been imagined, drifting down through the floorboards with chilling clarity. It is waiting. The words threaded through my mind with a cold certainty that hollowed my chest. Not the stranger, something else, something behind the symbol, something the stranger was preparing. It is waiting. Waiting for what? Or or worse, waiting for me. The house felt thinner the following morning, as if some unseen weight had pressed its structure inward during the night, stretching the walls until they grew fragile beneath the strain. I woke before the weak daylight reached the windows, my body alert with a tension that felt inherited from the silence itself. Each breath came tight and shallow, shaped by the memory of the whisper that drifted down through the floorboards the night before. "It is waiting." Those words clung to me like a second pulse, repeating beneath every heartbeat with a cold inevitability I could not shake. I sat up slowly, urging my thoughts to steady, but clarity remained out of reach. Something had shifted during the night, not physically. The furniture sat exactly where it belonged, untouched. The living room lights flickered with their usual inconsistency, yet beneath the familiar layout, something deeper pulsed, a wrongness that grew harder to ignore. It was as though the boundary between the house and whatever existed beyond its walls had thinned, leaving only a fragile membrane separating me from the stranger's influence. I stood and moved toward the center of the room, listening. The silence was no longer still. It carried an undercurrent, a faint vibration like distant machinery heard through heavy concrete. The coldness that had seeped down from the upper floor the night before remained settled in the air, yet there was something else woven into it. A pressure, a presence. The same feeling one gets when standing too close to the edge of a cliff, where open space amplifies the instinct to fall. I approached the staircase slowly, each step creaking beneath my weight. Halfway up, the pressure grew stronger, dense enough to scrape against my skin like drifting static. My hand hovered above the banister, but the cold radiating from the wood stung my fingers, forcing me to pull away. When I reached the top, the hallway stretched ahead in quiet anticipation, shadows pooling heavily in each corner. My bedroom door stood open again. I had not opened it. A breath caught in my throat. I stepped forward, guided by equal parts fear and necessity. The moment I crossed the threshold, the pressure drew inward, closing around me like a tightening collar. The air quivered faintly. The walls seemed to listen. The closet remained shut, a single deviation from the night before, yet one that filled the room with heightened alertness. The carved symbol behind that door haunted my thoughts, sprawling across the closet wall like an ancient script resurrecting itself. I approached carefully, each footstep angled with caution. When I placed my hand on the doorknob, the metal felt warm, almost as if someone had been holding it only moments before. I drew a slow breath and pulled the door open. The symbol had grown again. Its lines had darkened, deepening into the wall as if carved from the inside out. The grooves pulsed faintly in the dim light, releasing thin trails of cold mist with each breath-like motion. But the lines no longer formed a flat image. They bulged slightly, raised as though something beneath the surface pressed outward. The wall swelled with unnatural tension, expanding like skin stretched too tightly over bone. The message carved onto the floor remained the same. Do not step inside. The warning carried a sharper resonance now, a plea or a command. My eyes drifted toward the clothes hanging along the rod. They were completely still, no rustling, no trembling, no hints of movement behind the fabric. But the absence of motion only grew more unsettling. Whatever had moved the night before seemed to have retreated deeper, pushed back by its own growing presence. Suddenly a noise echoed through the room, not from the closet, but from the far corner of the bedroom. A tap, then another, slow, measured, purposeful. I turned, heart pounding. On the opposite wall, directly beside the window, a faint crack formed, branching outward like a thin, jagged root. Dust sprinkled softly to the floor as the crack deepened. The sound echoed again, tap. Tap, each impact shaping the fracture with deliberate precision. The stranger was writing, not on the closet wall this time, on the bedroom wall itself. I stepped backward instinctively. The crack extended, curling downward into a shape that mirrored one of the smaller lines from the symbol inside the closet. My breath caught as recognition settled in. The two markings were connected, parts of a larger design, sprawling beyond the confines of a single surface. The symbol was expanding. Another line split across the wall, meeting the first with sharp intention. The temperature dropped instantly. Frost formed along the edges of the crack, spreading in thin crystalline webs. A whisper rose, barely audible, more vibration than sound. "You are falling behind." The words brushed across my mind like a cold fingertip tracing my thoughts. I stumbled toward the hallway, unable to remain inside the room any longer. The moment my foot crossed the threshold, the whisper ceased, swallowed by the heavy silence that filled the hallway. But the cold followed me. It spread outward from the bedroom, drifting like a slow fog across the upper floor. I hurried downstairs, refusing to look back. When I reached the living room, the pressure eased slightly, but the cold remained, settling in thick layers beneath the windows. I paced, trying to regain composure, but every sound made me flinch. Eventually, I sank onto the couch, palms pressed against my temples as I fought to steady my breathing. The stranger's messages were growing more frequent, more complex. Their warnings, once cryptic, now carried urgency. Something was nearing completion, something they believed I needed to understand. Then, from overhead, the tapping began again. Not writing, not cracking, knocking. 3 knocks, a pause, 3 more, then a final sequence. It mimicked the rhythm of a heartbeat. My heartbeat. I felt the blood drain from my face. The stranger was not simply observing me. They were syncing with me, folding their presence around my pulse, their voice around my thoughts, their messages around my memories. My life had become the blueprint for whatever they were building, and the whisper that drifted down the staircase confirmed what I already feared. "You must be ready soon." For what? A chill rippled through me as the answer formed unbidden in my mind. For the moment the symbol opens, the day that followed felt like a thin imitation of morning, a fragile reconstruction of daylight that could not disguise how deeply the house had changed. I stood in the living room with my hands braced against the back of the couch, staring at the faint condensation blooming across the windows from the inside. Cold clung to the glass in delicate webs, frost forming patterns that resembled fragments of the growing symbol upstairs. Every line of voice felt intentional, as though the house was echoing the message carved into its walls. I knew before I took another breath that the stranger had not left during the night. Their presence pressed against the atmosphere in slow, heavy pulses. Even the air carried a subtle vibration that hummed against my skin. Something was evolving, something the stranger had been preparing, something the symbol existed to open. I forced myself toward the staircase, drawn by a grim mixture of dread and inevitability. The moment my foot touched the first step, the cold intensified. By the third step, the air thinned. By the seventh, the house itself seemed to hold its breath. My pulse hammered unevenly. Each step forward felt like stepping deeper into a place the world had rejected long ago. At the top of the stairs, the hallway appeared slightly altered. The shadows along the floor looked stretched, elongated as though pulled by invisible hands toward my bedroom door. I swallowed hard and moved forward. When I reached the threshold, I stopped. The door was gone. Not open, not closed. Gone. The frame remained, its edges lined with thin cracks spiraling outward, but the wooden panel that once filled the doorway had vanished completely. The empty space yawned like a hollow cut into the structure of the house. My stomach clenched as cold air drifted through the doorway in slow, oppressive waves, brushing against my skin like static soap cloth. I stepped inside the room. The symbol carved on the closet wall pulsed faintly with a dim blue glow, its lines rising and falling as though drawing breath. The air vibrated with the same rhythm. I found myself matching the pulses involuntarily, my lungs sinking with the unnatural cadence emanating from the walls. The deeper grooves of the carving had darkened to a color close to black, absorbing light rather than reflecting it. Behind the symbol, something shifted, creating a ripple in the surface of the wall like movement beneath water. The message on the floor remained unchanged, but the tone of it felt different now. Do not step inside. I wondered whether the warning still applied, or if the stranger had expected me to ignore it. My pulse climbed painfully into my throat as I approached the closet. A sudden sound cracked through the stillness, a wet tearing noise. The wall behind the symbol bulged forward, then receded. The symbol trembled, its lines vibrating violently for several seconds before going still again. The room darkened momentarily, though no lights flickered. It was as if the space around me blinked. I stumbled backward, my hands shaking. Then a new message carved itself onto the far wall, forming instantly, without transition, without a visible hand. One moment the surface was smooth, the next it bore etched letters as deep and sharp as blades. You cannot leave now. My breath shattered into a stuttering gasp. I spun toward the hallway, but the doorway had shifted, not disappeared, but narrowed, its shape distorted by slight inward bends of the frame, as though the walls were contracting around the room. I stepped toward the exit, forcing my legs to move despite the rising panic. Before I reached the hallway, a heavy thud struck the ceiling, then another, then another. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, dragging steps traveling across the upper floor, despite the fact that I stood in the topmost room. The footsteps traced a path directly above me, circling the ceiling with unnatural patience. I backed away, eyes wide, listening helplessly as the unseen presence paced overhead. The footsteps stopped abruptly. Silence. Then the ceiling bowed inward, just a fraction of an inch, too slight to break plaster, but enough to show that something pressed down from above with impossible weight. My breath locked in my chest. The curve of the ceiling followed the arc of a step, moving from one corner of the room to the other before settling directly above the closet. The ceiling bulged again, deeper this time, cracking faintly at the edges. I stepped backward until my shoulders hit the cold wall. The moment my skin touched the surface, I heard it, a whisper that came not through the air, but through the structure of the house itself, vibrating through the wood, the drywall, the floor, and into my bones. It is beginning. The symbol flared, not brightly, not violently, but with a low, intense glow that illuminated the closet with an eerie clarity. Every carved line shimmered with cold light. A thin crack ran through the center of the symbol, splitting it like the seam of a shell, preparing to open. No, not open, unfold. The wall flexed forward in a smooth liquid motion, bending outward, as if the material had turned soft. A low groaning rumble filled the room, vibrating through the floorboards. My legs trembled violently. The glow intensified. A voice rose behind me, not whispered, spoken. Do not look directly. I turned instinctively toward the doorway and froze. The stranger stood in the hall, not visible, not in any human form, but outlined in the distortion of the air, a tall ripple of shifting pressure shaped like a silhouette. Its edges wavered like heat mirage, but radiated cold instead of warmth. Depthless darkness filled the space where a face should have been. The figure raised an arm, if it could be called an arm, and pointed toward the stairs. Go! The entire room shuddered as the symbol split further. A gust of icy wind blasted outward from the closet, knocking me sideways. I didn't hesitate. I ran. The hallway narrowed behind me, the walls bending inward, as though trying to hold me back. I slammed my shoulder into the staircase railing and nearly fell down the steps, catching myself only by instinct. The air shook with a low rumble. A crack echoed from above, followed by a sound like tearing fabric stretched across stone. I hit the bottom floor, gasping, stumbling forward until I reached the center of the living room. The walls vibrated. The floor beneath me rippled like subtle waves passing through solid wood. Then everything stopped. Silence, stillness, cold. I turned slowly toward the staircase as the final sound drifted down from the upper floor. A slow exhale, not human, not singular, multiple, layered breaths merging into one. Whatever waited inside the symbol was no longer waiting. It had begun to wake. The house exhaled a long, cold breath that drifted through every room, and with it came the certainty that whatever had woken upstairs was no longer bound to the walls that once held it. I stood in the center of the living room, my pulse trembling beneath my skin, trying to understand the shifting heaviness in the air. The stranger's presence had always been unsettling, intrusive, watching, but what had awakened inside the symbol was different. Larger, older, hungrier. I tried to steady my breathing, yet the silence around me swallowed every sound. Even my heartbeat felt muffled, as though the house itself absorbed its rhythm. Shadows stretched along the floor in thin, searching lines, reaching for corners that no longer felt safe. I forced myself toward the staircase, drawn by a mixture of dread and inevitability that weighed on my shoulders like lead. If the stranger had urged me to run, perhaps that meant some part of them still opposed the thing behind the symbol. Perhaps they were not the threat I once believed, or perhaps they simply needed me intact for whatever came next. Each step up the staircase groaned beneath my feet. Halfway up, a vibration pulsed downward from the upper floor, rippling through the wood beneath my shoes. I froze. Another pulse followed, then another, rhythmic, intentional, like the early beats of a heart learning how to beat again. The air burned cold. When I reached the top of the stairs, the hallway felt narrower than before, as though the walls had drawn inward to limit my movement. A thin line of frost traced the baseboards, creeping out from my bedroom like spilled liquid that froze mid-flow. I stepped toward the doorway slowly, every instinct screaming at me to stay back, but curiosity held me captive. The doorway remained empty, the door itself still missing. Beyond it, my bedroom glowed faintly with a dull blue haze that flickered like distant lightning trapped behind clouds. I gripped the edge of the frame and leaned forward. The closet door lay on the floor in two splintered halves. The symbol that had been carved onto the back wall no longer existed as a single shape. Instead, it unfolded outward across the closet's interior, splitting into interlocking, jagged lines that crawled up the sides of the wall and across the ceiling like veins of some ancient fossil erupting into the open. The cracks glowed faintly, pulsing with each unseen heartbeat. But the center of the symbol had changed most of all. It had split open, not in any physical way I recognized, but in a distortion of space itself. The air inside the closet warped, bending inward like a dark well. Dim light spiraled through the distortion, twisting into shapes without form, like shadows cast by something not meant to exist in the world I knew. My breath hitched. A low hum rose from the opening, deep and resonant, vibrating my bones. This was the thing that had been waiting, the thing the stranger had been preparing. I stepped backward, unable to tear my eyes from the closet. The hum deepened, and a faint whisper slithered from the distortion, curling around me like smoke. "You hear us now." The voice felt layered, like countless whispers speaking in unison. My knees weakened. I steadied myself against the wall as the room darkened around the edges. The temperature plummeted. Frost crept across the floor. The hum rose again. "You are the last piece." My throat constricted. I backed toward the hallway, but a sharp crack echoed behind me. I spun, claw-like markings appeared across the bedroom wall in long, deliberate strokes, not scratches. Writing, letters formed in quick succession, carved by invisible hands. Do not move. The stranger's message, their warnings had grown more urgent, more direct. I froze, trembling. The humming space in the closet deepened into a swirling vortex of shifting darkness. The walls vibrated, the floor quivered. A low guttural sound rose from the distortion. Something was pushing through. The wall to my right bent inward, as if pressed by a massive unseen force. A jagged line formed along the ceiling. I swallowed a cry and stepped backward into the hallway. The moment my foot crossed the threshold, the walls contracted violently, slamming inward as though trying to trap whatever lurked inside. The house shook. A roar tore through the upper floor, shaking dust from the ceiling and rattling the floor beneath my feet. I bolted down the stairs 2 at a time, nearly tripping as the railing vibrated. When I reached the bottom, I stumbled into the living room, gasping for breath. The lights flickered, the walls vibrated. A voice whispered through the floorboards. "You must run." I spun toward the front door, but before I reached it, the windows darkened with an oily shadow that seeped across the glass like ink. The house groaned. The air grew thinner. I pressed a hand to my chest, fighting to breathe. Then something moved on the staircase behind me, slow, heavy, dragging. I turned slowly, dread coiling in my stomach. A tall, warped silhouette descended the stairs, its shape twisting as though made from smoke and bone. Its head tilted with unnatural curiosity, and its limbs bent in ways no human form could manage. The shadow pulsed with the same blue glow as the symbol. It had come through. I staggered backward, my legs trembling. The silhouette stepped onto the living room floor, the boards creaking beneath a weight that should not have existed. Its form flickered, expanding and contracting like a breathing shadow. Then the stranger's voice rose again, sharp, urgent, commanding. "Do not look at it." I squeezed my eyes shut instantly, tears burning down my cheeks. A cold wind whipped across my face as the creature moved closer. The walls groaned. The floor shook. Something brushed the air inches from my skin. Then, silence. The cold withdrew. I opened my eyes slowly. The creature was gone, but the windows remained darkened with shadow. The symbol had opened, and whatever had come through was now loose inside my world. The stillness that followed felt heavier than any silence the house had held before. It moved around me like a living thing, wrapping itself along the edges of the walls, coiling beneath the floorboards, pressing into the corners of the room with cold precision. I stood frozen near the center of the living room, unable to tear my eyes from the staircase where the warped silhouette had appeared moments earlier. The shadow had vanished, dissolved without sound or trace, yet its presence lingered like a stain soaked deep into the air. The windows remained drowned in darkness, their surfaces shimmering with a thin, oily sheen that pulsed faintly as though breathing. Outside, no light came through, no color, no motion. It felt as if the world beyond the walls had been erased, leaving only the shape of the house floating in a void too deep to comprehend. My chest tightened with the realization that whatever had come through the symbol upstairs had pulled something with it, not just shadow but absence. I forced myself to move, each step shaking beneath the weight of dread. My mind churned with questions I no longer had the strength to articulate. What had awakened in the symbol? Why the stranger had warned me so insistently? Whether the presence upstairs had ever belonged to this world at all? And now, what it wanted with me? The stranger had said I was the last piece. The thing behind the symbol had whispered, "You hear us now." Both messages tangled in my thoughts like webs tightening around my throat. I approached the staircase again, though fear clawed at my spine. The air pulsed once more with a low, resonant vibration. My foot hesitated on the first step. The wood trembled beneath me, responding to some unseen rhythm. A heartbeat pressed into the structure of the house. I gripped the railing and climbed slowly. At the fourth step, the railing jerked beneath my hand, rippling like something alive. I recoiled instantly, nearly losing my balance. The vibration ceased. The silence returned with suffocating force. When I reached the top of the stairs, the hallway felt narrower still. Its shadows pulled taut like stretched fabric. The cold curled around my ankles, climbing slowly up my legs. The doorway to my bedroom remained open, though the blue glow had dimmed to a faint pulse. Like a dying ember resisting collapse, I stepped toward it with caution. Each movement felt observed, measured, as if unseen eyes traced the shape of my body in the dimness. Inside the bedroom, the air quivered with residual energy. The space where the creature had stood shimmered faintly with a distortion that bent the lamplight into warped streams. The closet, or what remained of it, no longer resembled a simple wooden cavity. The walls inside had pulled outward and upward, twisted into jagged slopes that rose like the ribs of some ancient beast. The symbol itself continued to pulse along the surface, its lines sinking deeper, merging with the material as though becoming part of the house's anatomy. I stayed near the doorway, unwilling to cross the threshold. The floor had changed too. The wood rippled in faint waves, responding to every breath I took. I knew instinctively that stepping any farther risked provoking whatever had come through the opening. And yet, an unfamiliar sensation tugged at me, pulling from deep in my chest. A compulsion, something ancient and resonant, echoing the pulses of light ahead. It terrified me how close the sensation felt to recognition. Before I could retreat, a new vibration moved through the walls. A slow, steady tapping, not footsteps, not carving, something softer, almost experimental, as if the creature was learning to navigate its new environment. The sound drifted from inside the closet, then jumped suddenly to the far corner of the room. My pulse sped. Another tap echoed behind me in the hallway, then at the base of the stairs. The entity was moving faster than sound itself, mapping the house with its presence. The tapping ceased abruptly. Then the whisper came again, not from the closet this time, from directly behind me. "Turn." The command slid cold across my spine. I did not want to obey. My legs trembled, my breath choking in my throat. But something deeper than fear compelled me to look, pulling my head slowly, inexorably, toward the hallway. The stranger stood before me, not as a silhouette this time, nor as pressure distorting the air, but as a faint humanoid form assembled from threads of shadow and thin latticework of cold blue light. Their outline flickered in and out of visibility, as though they were stitched into existence one moment and unraveling the next, where a face should have been, only a smooth surface remained, reflecting a dim shimmer of the bedroom's glow. Their voice entered my mind rather than my ears. "It is loose. You must not allow it to anchor." I swallowed hard, unable to look away. "What does it want?" I whispered, though I wasn't sure if I spoke aloud or only thought the words. The stranger replied with a ripple of cold. To finish, the floor trembled beneath us. From inside the bedroom, the deep hum rose again, now accompanied by a faint scraping sound. The stranger moved closer, their form bending toward me in fluid, unnatural motion. "If it finishes, you will no longer be you." The words hit me with terrifying clarity. My body chilled, my pulse stuttered. The scraping inside the bedroom sharpened suddenly, becoming more frantic. The stranger extended an arm toward me, their fingers tapering into thin lines of light. "You must sever the connection." I shook my head. "How?" The stranger's form flickered violently, as though struggling to remain present. "Break the symbol." A surge of panic rushed through me. I can't even get close to it." "You can. It draws from you. It opens because of you. It wakes because of you." The scraping intensified. A sharp crack split the air inside the closet. A gust of freezing wind burst outward, slamming into the stranger's form and scattering their outline like loose ash. I gasped as the pieces reassembled, weakened but still present. "Go now. Break its center. Break its sight." The command echoed through my mind. My body obeyed before my thoughts could protest. I stepped into the bedroom, the floor rippling beneath my feet. The pulsing glow illuminated the jagged remains of the closet. The vortex inside the symbol shifted, swirling faster, its edges expanding outward. The temperature plunged, my breath turned to frost. I approached slowly, terrified, compelled. The symbol pulsed harder, reacting to my presence. Lines brightening, cracks widening. The vortex pulled faintly at the air around me, tugging my clothes, pulling strands of my hair forward as though tasting my presence. Behind me, the stranger's voice echoed one final time. "Break it." I reached out. The moment my hand touched the edge of the symbol, the vortex screamed. Light exploded outward in violent spirals. The walls buckled, and somewhere deep inside the collapsing glow, something ancient and furious awakened fully. The blast of light swallowed everything. For an instant I felt weightless, suspended in a white void that pulsed with unbearable intensity. The house, the walls, the air, even the sound of my own breathing, everything dissolved in the blinding eruption that surged from the heart of the symbol. I threw my arms over my face, but the light pierced straight through my closed eyelids, sinking into my mind like molten fire. It was not ordinary light. It carried a presence, a force, A gaze, something ancient pressed against me, trying to understand the limits of my body, my thoughts, my memories. Then the light collapsed. Darkness crashed back into existence. The bedroom returned in fragments, edges distorted as though reality had been stretched too thin and was only now snapping back into shape. The air trembled. Dust drifted through the space in slow motion, each particle suspended in an unnatural stillness. The floor beneath me shook with a faint tremor. My knees gave out, and I collapsed against the wall, gasping as the world reassembled around me. A low roar echoed from inside the closet, vibrating across the room. The symbol, once pulsing with cold blue light, now glowed a deep, violent red. Its lines twisted in on themselves, pulling in every direction at once, writhing as though alive. The surface of the wall cracked open further, splitting into jagged channels that oozed darkness. The vortex at the center spiraled shut, then flared open again, this time wider, deeper, more furious. I jerked away instinctively, crawling across the warped floorboards. A new sound rose from inside the opening, a chorus of layered breathing, filling the room with the sensation of something vast inhaling. The walls bowed inward, the windows shook, the air thickened until each breath dragged painfully against my throat. The stranger appeared beside me in a rippling burst of shadow and light. Their form flickered with instability, threads of their outline unweaving and rewinding. They were weaker now, barely held together by the energy that had once shielded me from the worst of the entity behind the symbol. Their voice surged into my thoughts with urgent force. "You must get away from it. It is breaking through." I tried. I choked out, gripping the cracked floor for balance. "I did what you told me." The stranger turned toward the closet. Their form extended outward in harsh streaks of shadow that strained against the vortex, pushing, resisting, but barely making contact. Their arm dissolved at the edges where the red light touched it. They recoiled, fragments of their form scattering like smoke. It has grown beyond our control. The vortex pulsed, and something pushed against its edge. A shape, a limb, smooth and pale, as though carved from bone and shadow. It pressed outward, stretching the air around it like elastic. The hand, if it could be called a hand, slid through the opening, grasping the edge of the closet wall with long, impossible fingers. The nails tore grooves into the material with casual force, pulling the rest of the limb through. The stranger's voice surged again, layered with urgency and fear. "Do not let it see you." I ducked behind the bed, heart slamming against my ribs. The room darkened as the creature pulled more of its form into the whirl. A second limb emerged, then a third, each joint bending at unnatural angles. The air warped around its body. The floorboards buckled with each shift. Then a head emerged, or something resembling a head, smooth, featureless, a pale oval with no eyes, no mouth, no recognizable form except for the faint impression of a face pressing outward from beneath the surface, as though something hid behind a thin sheet of skin, waiting to peel its way through. The stranger positioned themselves between me and the creature, their weakened form trembling under the strain. It is not complete. It cannot fully pass until it has taken shape from something living. My breath froze in my chest. "You mean me?" I whispered. The stranger did not answer. Their silence confirmed everything. The creature lifted its head, sensing the air. Though it had no eyes, I felt its awareness sweep across the room like a frigid wind. It turned toward the bed, toward me. I clamped a hand over my mouth, fighting the urge to scream. The stranger lunged forward, striking the creature with a flare of blue light. The impact staggered it, but only slightly. It tilted its head in response. Not with pain, but curiosity, the stranger struck again, their form unraveling as they poured what remained of their strength into the blow. The creature reached out lazily, brushing the air. The stranger's body shattered. Their form broke into 1,000 threads of shadow, scattering across the room like torn fabric caught in a violent wind. The remnants drifted downward, dissolving before they touched the floor. A hollow ringing filled the house as the last traces of the stranger vanished completely. I had been left alone. A low groan rippled through the walls as the creature stepped fully into the room. Its limbs stretched, expanding beyond human proportions, bending the shadows to its will. The red glow from the broken symbol pulsed through its body like veins filled with molten light. It searched, it sensed, it learned. Then it began to mimic the faint suggestion of a mouth pressed outward from beneath its smooth face. A second later, a shallow indentation formed where eyes should be. The creature leaned forward, shaping itself from the air, rewriting its own surface with terrifying ease. It was trying to become something it had studied, something familiar, something human. A cold realization hit me. It was trying to become me. I scrambled backward, crawling toward the hallway as the creature lurched forward on limbs that moved with unnatural fluidity. The floor cracked beneath its weight. The air in front of it distorted, bending as though recoiling from its presence. I reached the hallway and stumbled to my feet, running blindly toward the stairs. Behind me, the creature followed, its limbs scraping against the doorframe, tearing large splinters from the wood. It moved faster with each step, its form stabilizing, adapting, learning. The house groaned as I lunged down the staircase. The shadows along the walls shifted like living things, pulling away from the creature as though even darkness itself wanted to flee. I reached the bottom step just as the creature descended behind me, its elongated hand brushing the railing, melting the wood beneath its fingers. The front door loomed ahead. I sprinted for it, but before I could reach the handle, a voice echoed from everywhere and nowhere at once. "You cannot run." The world dimmed. The creature stepped onto the lower floor, and the house itself seemed to close around us. The house tightened around me like a living cage. Every wall, every beam, every shadow seemed to shift with purpose. As the creature descended fully into the lower floor, its limbs dragged against the stairs in slow, scraping motions that sent vibrations through the entire structure. I stumbled backward, chest heaving, my mind clawing for any sense of direction, any exit. But the moment my hand brushed the doorknob, the metal pulsed beneath my skin, warming unnaturally, almost burning. The creature had closed the house, locked the world out, or locked me in. I turned slowly. The creature's silhouette towered at the base of the stairs, its form expanding in slow, rhythmic pulses, like lungs learning the motion of breath for the first time. Its head tilted in that unnatural way that suggested curiosity rather than aggression, though the distinction offered me no comfort. The smooth, blank plane of its face rippled faintly, stretching inward, as if something beneath the surface pushed upward, trying to force itself into shape. The impressions it formed mirrored features I recognized: my jawline, the slope of my cheek, the faint outline of my brow. It was learning my face. I staggered backward, knees weakening beneath me. The creature stepped forward, its limbs striking the floor with heavy, wet thuds. Each step bent the wooden boards downward like stretched rubber, the air around it distorted, pulling inward, twisting around the creature as though gravity itself clung to its presence. It moved with purpose, with awareness, with hunger. A sudden sharp crack echoed through the house, splintering the silence. The creature paused, its head turned toward the ceiling. Listening, I followed its gaze, terrified of what I might see, but the ceiling held nothing except a faint tremor that rippled through the beams. Then the tremor deepened, vibrating through the floor with enough force to rattle the furniture. Something else was in the house. The creature's posture shifted, the smooth plane of its face contorted slightly. Not fear, not confusion, recognition. A voice surfaced from the walls, thin and fractured, as though pushed through from a great distance. "You must keep moving." The stranger, their voice was weaker, diffused across the structure of the house like a fading echo, but it still carried urgency, a thread of command woven through the broken static. The creature responded instantly, its elongated torso twisting while its limbs realigned with sickening fluidity. It stepped toward me again. I ran. My legs launched me toward the kitchen, every instinct screaming as I pushed off the warped floorboards. The air thickened behind me as the creature lunged forward with unnatural speed. I slid across the cold tiles and nearly crashed into the counter. A heavy impact followed wood splintered as the creature's arm smashed into the doorframe, cracking it apart. I scrambled toward the far end of the kitchen, desperately searching for anything I could use as a barrier. The lights flickered once, twice, then steadied into a dim, pulsing glow that matched the rhythm of the creature's movements. Its shadow elongated across the floor, stretching toward me even before its body advanced. I reached the sliding back door and pulled with all my strength. It didn't move. The glass had turned black. A dark, oily substance coated the entire surface from the outside, sealing it shut. The house had absorbed the world beyond it into the creature's domain. My breath hitched. Panic clawed up my throat. Behind me, the creature stepped onto the tile. The cold deepened. The lights dimmed again. It was close enough that I felt the air twisting around its limbs, warping space with every motion. Then the stranger's voice sliced through the room again. "Do not let it complete you." The creature froze, its smooth face rippled violently, as though a new feature pressed outward from beneath the surface. The faint outline of eyes formed, pushing against the skin, shaping themselves from memory. My memory. It wasn't just mimicking me, it was becoming me piece by piece, pulling details from my presence, my breath, my fear. If it finished the transformation, if it anchored into my form, it would not need me anymore. I spun and grabbed the nearest object, a heavy iron pan resting beside the stove. My hands shook as I clutched the handle, forcing myself to face the creature. Its head swiveled toward me, smoothing into a blank expression as though waiting. I swung. The pan struck its arm. The surface of its limb warped around the impact, absorbing it like thick liquid, then reshaped instantly. The creature tilted its head again, studying the action, not hurt, not angered, learning. A faint hum rose from its body. The lights dimmed further, plunging the kitchen into a suffocating half-darkness. The hum intensified, resonating through my bones. My vision blurred, my knees buckled. The creature stepped closer. Through the fog of dizziness, the stranger's voice returned, louder this time, pressing directly into my thoughts. Break its sight. I blinked, forcing myself to focus. Its sight. But it had no eyes, not fully. The impressions forming beneath its surface, the shapes stealing my features, were its means of orienting, anchoring, adapting. If I could disrupt that, the creature lunged. I raised the pan again, but it knocked it aside easily. The pan skittered across the floor, striking the cabinet with a metallic clang. I dodged the creature's next strike, stumbling toward the counter where a drawer hung slightly open. I reached for it, grasping desperately for anything. My hand closed around a jagged piece of broken ceramic, sharp enough to cut my palm. The creature twisted toward me. Its face rippled again, forming a clearer outline. Its limbs lengthened. The humming deepened into a growl that pressed against my chest like weight. Then its head split open, not by flesh, but by distortion. A vertical seam tore down the center, revealing a vortex of shifting blackness that pulsed outward like a pupil dilating. Its sight, its anchor. My thoughts snapped into focus. I gripped the ceramic shard tight, feeling blood trickle down my wrist as the creature leaned forward, aligning its distorted gaze with mine. I lunged upward and struck the center of its face. A scream erupted not from the creature, but from the house itself. The lights exploded in a burst of white. The walls shook violently. The kitchen warped, stretching and twisting like melting wax. The creature reeled backward, its limbs thrashing as the seam across its face sealed abruptly, collapsing inward. Its entire form convulsed, bending into impossible shapes as though trying to escape its own unraveling. The stranger's voice surged through the chaos with blistering urgency. "Run now!" I bolted into the hallway, clutching my bleeding hand against my chest. Behind me, the creature's form slammed into the walls, shattering wood and sending debris across the floor. The house groaned, bending inward as if trying to fold around the creature before it destabilized entirely. I reached the bottom of the staircase, a pulse of energy surged through the house. Then the creature roared. Not human, not animal, not earthly. The sound tore through the air, vibrating my teeth, my bones, my vision. I dropped to my knees, hands clamped over my ears. The roar grew louder, shaking the foundation of the house. When it finally ceased, all that remained was silence, a silence sharper than any scream. I lifted my head slowly. The creature stood at the far end of the hallway, its face blank again, its limbs steady. It was stabilizing, reforming, and this time it moved with intent. Toward me, closer, closer, and the house closed behind it, like a mouth preparing to swallow. The hallway constricted around me, as if the house itself had developed lungs and was slowly exhaling, pushing its walls inward with crushing intent. The creature advanced with deliberate steps that bent the boards beneath its weight, each movement accompanied by a low, vibrating resonance that pulsed through my bones. I forced myself upright, though my legs trembled violently, and staggered backward until my shoulders hit the wall. The vibration increased, crawling up the floor like a shiver, closing the space between us one heartbeat at a time. The creature's form had stabilized further. Its limbs, once fluid and shifting, now moved with chilling purpose. The smooth blankness of its face had begun to define sharper impressions beneath the surface. The outline of a jaw, a ridge where a brow should be, the faint hollow of eye sockets. It was learning me in real time, echoing my shape from memory and proximity. Every second I remained within the house was another second it grew more familiar with my existence, my form, my presence. A deep static rolled through the walls. The stranger's weakened voice flickered through the distortion. Do not let it take your shape. The creature paused mid-step, its head turned slightly toward the voice, though there was no clear direction to indicate where the words came from. The stranger's presence was weaker than ever, threadbare, a dying echo fighting to exist within the collapsing structure of the house. The creature resumed its movement, faster this time, its limbs stretching forward with unnatural speed. I sprinted toward the basement door, not because it was safe, but because it was the only direction not immediately blocked. The house shuddered as I reached for the handle. The metal twisted beneath my fingers, resisting as though the house itself did not want me to enter. I slammed my shoulder against the door. It flew open, and I stumbled down the steps, catching myself against the rail as the basement swallowed me in near total darkness. The creature's footsteps thundered above before the house shifted violently. Wooden beams groaned, dust rained down. The basement door slammed shut as if pushed by an invisible force. The impact sent a shockwave through the stair frame. The darkness grew thicker, almost physical. I grabbed the wall and felt my way downward until my feet reached the cold concrete floor. The basement had always been unsettling, but now it felt transformed into something deeper, older. The air throbbed with low vibrations. Shadows clung to the ceiling in dense clusters, twisting as though stirred by a wind I could not feel. The single bulb overhead flickered, casting spasms of light across the space before finally stabilizing into a dim, sputtering glow. I scanned scanned the floor. The old workbench lay against the far wall, tools scattered across its surface. Shelves sagged with forgotten boxes. The dryer droned quietly in the corner, though I had not turned it on. And in the center of the room, etched into the concrete, was a shape I had never seen before. A symbol, not the same as the one upstairs, but connected. This one spiraled inward like a coiled thread, carved deeply into the ground with jagged precision. My stomach twisted. The creature wasn't the only thing emerging. The stranger's voice had said it was not complete, that it needed me to anchor. But this symbol, this one, looked like an anchor already placed. My chest tightened with a realization that chilled me deeper than any whisper had before. The house had been preparing far longer than I had understood. I approached slowly. The carving pulsed with faint traces of light, thin as spider silk, weaving through the grooves. The moment I knelt to inspect it, the basement door exploded open. Splinters burst across the room. Dust clouded the air. The creature descended the stairs in a single distorted motion, its limbs bending in ways that defied physics. It struck the floor with a heavy crack that rattled the foundation. Its gaze found me immediately. Not eyes, but awareness. The blank face rippled. Beneath the surface, new impressions formed. The bridge of a nose, the curvature of lips, the hollow crease of an emerging expression. My expression. The lights flickered violently. The air warped around the creature, compressing space. I backed toward the symbol on the floor, hands shaking uncontrollably. The stranger's voice cut through the distortion again. Do not step into the mark. I froze mid-step. The creature lunged. I barely dodged. Its limb crashed into the concrete where I had been standing, cracking the floor and sending shards scattering across the basement. The creature rose, its form becoming sharper, more defined. The shape of its shoulders, its posture, even the angle of its head. It all mirrored me now, as though the creature were sculpting itself into my shadow. The house trembled violently, reacting to the creature's presence. Pipes clattered. The bulb overhead burst, plunging the basement into pulsing darkness illuminated only by the faint glow of the markings. The creature's silhouette advanced again, each motion accompanied by a distorted echo. Run! The stranger's voice rang louder, clearer, as though pulled together from the frayed edges of the house's memory. The command struck through me like lightning. I turned and fled between the shelves, weaving through stacks of boxes. The creature followed, smashing through obstacles with terrifying ease. Wood splintered, metal bent, shadows erupted in chaotic spirals. I reached the back corner of the basement, a dead end. The creature closed in. Its face had formed almost entirely now, molded from blank imitation into something eerily close to my own. My features, stripped of emotion, smooth and expressionless, a hollow version of me, as though sculpted by someone who understood shape, but not identity. The creature tilted its head with perfect mimicry. Then it opened its mouth, or rather, the facsimile of a mouth. No lips, no teeth, just a widening split that sank into the surface of its head, stretching downward until it reached the base of its neck, a void of twisting distortion. The stranger's voice erupted through the basement. Break the reflection. My gaze snapped to the workbench. A mirror, old, cracked, Its frame rusted. I grabbed it without thinking, ignoring the shards that cut into my fingers. The creature reached for me. I lifted the mirror, angling it toward the creature's forming face. Its reaction was immediate. The creature recoiled, limbs twisting violently as the reflection hit it. The distorted imitation of my face rippled, losing coherence. Its body spasmed, contorting into a blur of shifting shapes. The basement roared around us, walls trembling violently. The creature lunged again. I pressed the mirror closer. A scream tore through the basement, high, shrill, inhuman. The creature stumbled backward into the carved symbol on the floor. The moment its foot touched the mark, the lines erupted with blinding light, surging upward like chains made of fire. The creature convulsed, its body warped, its reflection shattered. A pulse exploded outward. I was thrown backward, slamming into the wall. Dust rained from the ceiling. Light flickered. The creature's distorted form collapsed inward and was pulled violently into the symbol, vanishing in a whirl of spiraling energy. Silence swallowed the basement. The glowing lines faded, and the stranger's voice spoke one last time, weak, fading, almost gone. It is not finished. You broke its form, but it will come again. This time, for the rest of you. The silence that followed the collapse of the creature was unlike anything I had ever felt. It was not the quiet that came after noise. It was the absence of something fundamental, as if the house were holding its breath, waiting to see whether the world would settle back into place or shatter entirely. I pushed myself upright, wincing as pain flared down my spine. Dust drifted from the ceiling in slow, ghost-like spirals. The glowing lines of the basement symbol dimmed further, fading into faint embers before disappearing entirely, leaving behind only a black scar etched into the concrete. But I knew the stranger was right. This was not the end. The creature had not died. It had only been severed from its forming shape. Its anchor disrupted. Whatever essence it possessed had slipped through the cracks of the basement mark, retreating into some unseen layer of the house. The basement vibrated with a subtle tremor, a pulse too faint to hear yet impossible to ignore. Something still lived within the walls. I staggered to my feet and pressed a hand against the nearest support beam to steady myself. My reflection in the broken shard of the mirror still lay scattered across the floor. I caught a glimpse of my eyes in a fragment wide, shaken, ringed with shadows that seemed not entirely natural. A cold shiver ran through me. Even my reflection felt unfamiliar now, as though the creature had taken something with it, some imprint that had yet to return. Above me, the floorboards creaked with slow, deliberate weight. I froze. The sound came again, a dragging pressure that moved from one end of the house to the other. Not heavy footsteps like before, not the shifting movement of the creature learning how to walk. This was something softer, lighter, but far more unsettling. It was as if the house itself had begun to shift, dragging its structure into alignment with something unseen. Then the stranger's voice returned fractured, barely audible, slipping through the walls in broken strains. "It is searching," my breath caught. "For me," I whispered, though I knew the answer. "Not only you." The words faded like dying embers. The stranger's presence, once piercing even in its weakened state, now felt thin, stretched across the house like a torn veil. I wasn't sure they could hold themselves together much longer. The basement groaned. A cold draft seeped through the walls, brushing past my legs like a searching hand. I backed toward the stairs. Each step up felt heavier than the last, as though the house resisted my movement. When I reached the top, the hallway had changed again. The shadows stretched upward in jagged angles, distorting the geometry of the ceiling. The floor seemed to slope inward in a subtle sideways tilt that made me dizzy. The air smelled faintly of something metallic, damp, raw. I moved carefully, scanning every corner. The house felt alive with listening. As I approached the living room, the lights above flickered in short, sharp bursts. 3 flashes, then darkness, then one long pulse. Took me a second to realize the lights were not malfunctioning. They were signaling. The stranger's voice scraped through the flicker. "It has found a new path." I turned toward the staircase leading to the second floor. The air thickened, pressing against my lungs. My heart pounded hard enough to shake my ribs. "What path?" I asked, but the stranger did not answer. The house answered instead. A soft whispering drifted down the stairs, threading through the silence like cold fingers sliding across my skin. The sound tapped against my mind in a rhythm that felt disturbingly familiar. I listened closer, breath shallow. It was my voice, whispering, repeating something I had not said. "Come back," the words hissed softly, rising and falling like breath drawn through shattered glass. "Come back." My stomach clenched. The creature was mimicking again, this time not my shape, but my voice, and unlike before, it was no longer guessing. It had learned enough to replicate sound with uncanny precision. The stranger's voice flared suddenly, cutting through the mimicry. "Do not answer." The whispering grew sharper, louder, as if reacting to the stranger's interference. I stumbled backward, covering my ears. The sound pressed into my skull, vibrating against my thoughts. "Come back, come back, come back." Then silence. The house went still, too still. The air shifted, and a shadow appeared at the top of the stairs. My shadow, perfectly shaped, perfectly still, but wrong. Its posture too rigid, its outline too sharp, its presence too cold. I could not breathe. The shadow did not move at first. It only watched from above, head tilted slightly forward, as though examining a version of itself from afar. Then, without warning, it descended one step, slow, silent. The stranger's voice tore through the air. "Do not let it reach you." I turned and ran. The house lurched violently, the floor tilting beneath my feet. Furniture scraped across the ground on its own, sliding to block my path one moment and pushing me forward the next. The house was choosing sides. But whose? I sprinted toward the kitchen, but halfway there the lights exploded in a bright shower of sparks. Darkness swallowed the space. I fumbled for balance, reaching out blindly until my fingers brushed the kitchen counter. Behind me, footsteps, not heavy, not dragging, mirror accurate to my own. I gasped, spinning. The silhouette stood inches from me, its edges warping like heat rising from asphalt. Before I could move, it reached toward my face, its hand identical to mine but darker, sharper, pulsing faintly with red light. The moment before it touched me, the stranger intervened. A violent burst of freezing energy erupted between us, hurling the silhouette backward. It crashed against the far wall, dissolving into a storm of black fragments before reforming in a crouched, predatory stance. The stranger flickered into view beside me, barely holding form. You must break its continuation. How? The stranger collapsed mid-sentence, their outline shredding into threads of flickering light. The shadow creature surged forward. Instinct overtook thought. I grabbed the closest object, a heavy glass jar, and swung with every ounce of strength left in me. The jar struck the shadow square in the head. Instead of shattering, the glass passed through its form like water cutting through smoke. But the shadow flickered, just barely. A weakness. The stranger's fading voice murmured a single phrase. Break yourself from it. Realization crashed over me like icy water. The creature was a continuation, a reflection trying to merge with me, claiming my identity piece by piece. To break it, I needed to break the connection it fed on. I closed my eyes, slowed my breathing, forced my thoughts into silence, and then I stepped backward into the darkest corner of the room, where no shadow could follow cleanly. The creature lunged. Its form hit the distorted darkness and shattered. A piercing shriek tore through the house, followed by a violent ripple that shook the floors, the walls, the foundations. The creature dissolved into fragments of twisting light, absorbed instantly by the house's warped structure. Silence fell again. The stranger whispered, "You severed it, but it still knows your shape, and it is still becoming." The house felt heavier after the shadow creature shattered, as if every beam and nail absorbed the scream that had rippled through its walls. The silence that followed was not relief, it was anticipation, a deep holding of breath, a coiling of something unseen waiting for its moment to return. I leaned against the kitchen counter, struggling to steady my breathing. My pulse hammered in my neck, each beat a painful reminder that I was still alive and that the creature still wanted what was left of me. The stranger's final words echoed faintly in my thoughts. "It still knows your shape." A cold ache settled into my bones. The shadow that had pursued me down the stairs had been an imitation, incomplete but terrifyingly accurate. If it could become that close to my reflection just by observing me, how much more could it become now that it had splintered into the structure of the house itself? I forced myself to move, stumbling away from the corner where the creature had broken. The darkness there still hummed faintly, as though remembering the moment of its unmaking. The living room lights flickered again once, twice then, steadied into a faint orange glow. The ceiling groaned. Something brushed along the upper beams. A whisper, a distortion, a reminder I was not alone. I stepped back into the hallway, every muscle tense. Shadows twisted across the walls in slow, crawling motions, drifting like smoke through fractured geometry. The house looked wrong again, its layout bending subtly, as if adjusting to a new tenant that lived between its surfaces. The floor tilted slightly toward the staircase. The ceiling lines curved inward with unnatural symmetry. The very air seemed to pulse with an awareness not entirely separate from the creature. The stranger's voice drifted faintly. "It is searching for the rest of you." I swallowed hard. The rest of me. The walls trembled at the sound of my voice. I lowered my tone, suddenly terrified of giving the creature something new to mimic. In the basement, it learned your reflection. Now it learns your presence, your movement, your memory. I closed my eyes, dread spiraling through me like ice water. The house groaned again, more violently this time. A loud crack split the air. I turned instinctively toward the staircase, just as something shifted on the landing. Not a form, not a shadow, a ripple. The wall along the staircase bent inward for a moment, its surface stretching like thin skin. Something moved behind it, something large, something that didn't need a defined shape to exist. My breath hitched. I stepped slowly backward as the ripple expanded. It pulsed once, then drew inward, forming a faint indentation, like the beginning of a face pressing against paper. A nose, a cheek, a brow. My brow. I stumbled away, shaking violently. The stranger's voice rushed in sharply. "Do not look at it while it forms." I spun toward the kitchen again, covering my eyes with trembling hands. The walls behind me groaned in disappointment. A low hum filled the air, vibrating through the floorboards. The pressure increased until my ears rang. I opened my eyes slowly. The ripple had ceased. The indentation vanished. But something had changed. The house no longer felt like a structure. It felt like a living conduit, channeling the creature through every wall and seam. I pushed myself away from the counter, breath shallow. I had to move. I had to find somewhere it couldn't already predict. I ran for the back hallway, my footsteps echoing sharply. The long corridor stretched ahead, darker than before, lit only by the faint glow of a single flickering bulb at the far end. As I moved deeper into the hallway, the air thickened. The shadows grew denser, swirling in silent layers above the floor. The bulb flickered violently as I approached. Then it went out. I stopped instantly. A cold breath drifted down the hallway. My breath echoed, repeated, then answered from behind. I spun, heart stopping. The hallway behind me was empty but distorted, its walls bending inward in a slow, fluid motion. A shape formed within the distortion. My outline again taller, thinner, stretched as though pulled from a reflection on rippling water. The stranger's voice burst through the darkness. "Keep moving." I turned and ran deeper down the hallway. The walls tightened around me, closing in like a throat swallowing. The floor wavered beneath my feet. I reached the end of the corridor and pushed into the utility room, slamming the door behind me. The tiny space was cramped with old paint cans, tools and broken appliances. Breathless, I pressed my back against the door. Silence. Then a gentle knock. 3 soft taps against the wood. I froze, my breath strangled in my throat. A second set of taps answered from the opposite wall, then another from the ceiling. The knocking grew rhythmic, synchronized like the heartbeat of something enormous surrounding the room. Dust drifted from the ceiling in trembling spirals. Then the creature whispered from the other side of the door, "You cannot hide from what you are." The voice was not mine, not the stranger's, but a warped combination of both. It mimicked tone, cadence, rhythm, searching for familiarity. It could shape itself around. I backed slowly toward the center of the utility room. The knocking grew louder, frantic, pounding in irregular bursts. The door rattled. The frame splintered. The stranger's voice snapped sharply. "Break the memory." I spun in confusion. What memory? The floor shook violently. A metal shelf toppled over. Tools scattered across the ground. The knocking turned into clawing, scraping, tearing. Your memory feeds its form. Break it. My eyes scanned the room desperately until they caught on something tucked in a cracked cardboard box on the top shelf. A framed photograph. The same one I kept in my bedroom. The same one the creature had seen. The same one it used. My face, smiling. Real, whole, a blueprint. I grabbed the frame, fingers shaking. The creature roared on the other side of the door, the wood buckling inward as claws tore through the panel. I hesitated, gripping the photo so tightly my knuckles ached. Then I broke it. The glass shattered in my hands. The photograph tore down the center, splitting my face into unrecognizable halves. The reaction was immediate. The creature screamed. A violent pulse exploded through the walls. The door cracked. The entire house shook as though struck by a seismic wave. I dropped to the floor, covering my head as shelves toppled and pipes burst overhead. The creature's scream faded into a whimper, then into silence. Complete, suffocating silence. I lifted my head slowly. The door hung crooked in its frame, torn and broken but quiet. The stranger's voice drifted softly, barely present. "You weakened it, not destroyed. Weakened." My chest heaved. "What now?" A long pause, then a whisper so faint I barely heard it. "Now it will try again, but this time it will come back wearing something new, something it remembers of you." The silence that followed the stranger's fading whisper clung to the air like a film of cold oil. Every breath I drew tasted thick, metallic, as if the house itself had begun to exhale through its walls. I pushed myself upright, shaky from the tremor that had rippled through the utility room. Bits of plaster drifted down like ashes. The photograph of my face lay torn at my feet, its image twisted into something unrecognizable. A symbolic severing, the stranger had insisted, a disruption in the creature's memory of me. But even as I stared at the jagged halves of the picture, I knew it was not enough. The house had become a living archive of everything I was. My footsteps echoed unnaturally as I stepped into the hallway again. The air pressed inward, thick with anticipation. Shadows crept along the walls in slow, geometric patterns that made no sense. sharp corners bending into curves, symmetrical shapes melting into formless blur. The entire structure felt like it had begun to rearrange itself according to the creature's will, bending and shifting to provide it a new shape, a new world to inhabit. The stranger's voice whispered faintly, threading through the hallway beams, "Do not trust the walls." I froze. Why? No answer, only the creaking of settling wood and the faint hum of something awakening deeper within the house. I turned toward the living room, but the space seemed further away than before, as if the hallway had lengthened while I wasn't looking. The shadows along the baseboards stretched toward me, reaching in thin, searching lines. I stepped back instinctively and something behind me exhaled. I spun, heart pounding. The utility room door stood open, but the darkness inside churned with a faint red glow that hadn't been there moments ago. The red thickened, swirling into the vague form of a face. My face melted, incomplete, and rapidly stitching itself together in ways that made my stomach twist. The creature had returned, but it was not whole, and it was trying to fix itself. I stumbled backward, palms slick with sweat. The red glow flickered violently, and the half-formed face dissolved into a smear of light. Then it reformed, reshaping itself, searching for the missing pieces of me it had lost when I broke the photo. The red streak expanded outward, coating the doorway like a living membrane. It pulsed once, twice, then it lurched into the hallway. "Run!" The stranger's voice cracked through the air, stronger now but laced with desperation. No more encouragement was needed. I bolted down the hallway, ignoring the way the walls bent inward behind me like jaws closing around prey. My feet pounded against the floor, each step echoing with unnatural delay. The air distorted around me, thickening, slowing my movement, as though the house itself tried to drag me backward. The creature followed, not with footfalls, but with sweeping, liquid motions that scraped along the walls like smeared paint coming to life. I reached the living room just as the shadows surged behind me. The fireplace roared to life, flames erupting without wood or spark. Heat washed across the room, warping the air into shimmering waves. The creature hesitated in the doorway, its red-lit form flickering violently as the fire's glow danced across it. The stranger's voice whispered through the flames, "It remembers heat." I swallowed hard. "Then this can stop it." "Not stop. Hold." The flames shot higher, licking up the stone walls of the fireplace in jagged spirals. The red smear of the creature recoiled, its shape convulsing into frantic waves. But even restrained, it pushed forward inch by inch, pulling itself through the doorway. It had learned enough of the house to resist being repelled by simple force. I backed toward the far wall, breathing hard. The heat from the fire pulsed against my skin. I could feel the house shifting again, preparing something new. The floor rippled beneath my feet, rising in uneven swells like the spine of some massive creature turning beneath the surface. The stranger's voice returned, thin now, barely more than breath. "Look up." I did and froze. The ceiling was no longer flat. It bulged downward in a huge, distorted dome, its its center pressing toward me as though weighted by something massive. Cracks spiraled outward from the dome, each fissure glowing faintly with the same red hue that clung to the creature. The cracks spread further, then split open violently. A hand reached through, not flesh, not bone, something woven from shadow and memory, a reconstruction of the creature's earlier form. It grasped the edge of the ceiling hole, pulling the rest of itself through with impossible grace. This form was taller, clearer, its features more defined though still unfinished. A faceless version of me stepped downward from the ceiling, like a puppet being lowered by invisible strings. My breath caught in my throat. Two versions now, two reflections of me, one incomplete, dripping red light from the doorway, one nearly finished, descending from above. The stranger's weakened voice whispered urgently, "Do not let them join." The creature from the ceiling stepped onto the floor, its movements synchronized with mine, mirroring my posture with eerie accuracy. The red smear flickered violently, pulling itself further into the room. They were converging. I darted toward the dining room, barely avoiding the grasp of the ceiling figure as its arms snapped outward with inhuman precision. The dining table flipped on its side without me touching it, the house rearranging itself to block the path of the red smear. But the creature seeped underneath, its liquid form sliding across the wood like a spilled reflection. They wanted to merge, combine their fragments into a whole. I reached the far window and stopped cold. My reflection stared back at me, but not from the glass. From the other side, the window pane bulged outward. My reflection pressed its hands against the glass, smiling with a mouth shaped wrong, too wide, too sharp. The smile deepened as cracks spread across the pane like frost. The stranger shouted inside my mind, "Do not look directly." I squeezed my eyes shut and ducked away just as the glass shattered inward. Shards rained across the floor. The reflection stepped into the room, another piece of the creature. Born from memory, the house refused to let die. 3 of them now, 3 incomplete versions of me. The red smear, the ceiling figure, the reflection. The house vibrated violently, lights bursting one after another. The stranger's voice flickered in and out, like a breaking radio signal. "It is assembling itself. You must scatter it again." "How?" I cried. Another crack split through the ceiling. Another hand emerged. Another shape began to form. My form. The stranger's voice stabbed through the air. "Break the room." I spun, looking around desperately. The walls pulsed with memory, each surface covered in faint impressions of events I barely recognized, moments from childhood, fragments of thoughts, reflections of feelings I had forgotten existed. The creature was feeding, growing, becoming. The fire roared louder. The red smear shrieked. The reflection laughed. The ceiling figure lunged. Then I realized the room was the anchor now. Every version of myself, every memory, every shadowed form had gathered here surrounding me, feeding on what the house preserved. I grabbed the nearest chair and hurled it through the opposite window. Glass exploded outward. Cold night air rushed in. The room responded in agony, its walls trembling violently. The memories flickered. The reflections convulsed. The red smear recoiled. The stranger screamed. Now I grabbed the heavy metal floor lamp, swung it toward the wall with every ounce of strength I had left, and smashed through the plaster. The wall collapsed inward, sending debris cascading across the room. The memories shattered. The reflections dissolved. The ceiling figure split apart. The red smear evaporated into smoke. A massive pulse burst outward, throwing me against the opposite wall. The fire extinguished instantly. The house trembled, shook, groaned, and then fell into absolute stillness. I lay gasping on the floor. The stranger whispered, faint and fading, "You scattered it, but only for a moment, because you broke the room. We'll need a new place to gather, and it is already choosing." The stillness after the collapse of the room pressed over me like the weight of deep water. Dust swirled through the darkness in slow, drifting spirals, suspended as though time itself had hesitated. Every surface around me, walls, floor, shattered window frame, trembled with a faint echo of the energy pulse that had blasted outward from the broken memories. I pushed myself upright, my arms shaking beneath the strain. The air felt wrong, hollow, too quiet for a house that had just consumed a piece of itself. My breath fogged in front of me, though the air was not cold. It was simply alive with something unseen. The stranger's whisper surfaced weakly, almost transparent. "It is gathering again." My pulse kicked sharply. "Where?" I asked, voice trembling. "Where is it gathering?" The whisper flickered, dissolving through the walls. "Listen." At first, I heard nothing, just an oppressive, suffocating silence. Then the faintest sound emerged. A rhythm, a trembling, a heartbeat. Not mine, not human. The pulse resounded through the structure of the house, subtle but unmistakable, as though the creature had burrowed into the deepest part of the walls and begun to shape itself anew. I staggered toward the hallway. The air thickened as I approached, congealing into a tension that clawed at my skin. The shadows along the floor quivered, responding to each vibration of the creature's growing pulse. The house was no longer collapsing, it was evolving. I reached the base of the stairs and stopped cold. The second floor no longer existed as I remembered it. The staircase had stretched upward, expanding into a twisting, spiraling ascent that disappeared into a darkness pulsing with red light. The walls on either side bent inward as though folding themselves into a cocoon. At the top of the stairs, a faint glow radiated, steady and deliberate. The creature was rebuilding itself there. The stranger's whisper grew louder. "It has chosen the upper floor. It will form fully if you do not break its path." My legs trembled. Every instinct screamed to turn back, to flee the house entirely. But there was no outside anymore. Only darkness beyond the shattered windows. Only the creature's domain. The house had become its chrysalis, and I was the final piece it needed to finish becoming. I set my foot on the first step. A wave of pressure surged downward, heavy enough to force a gasp from my lungs. The staircase rippled, bending under my weight like stretched fabric. I gripped the railing only to recoil instantly. The wood pulsed beneath my palm like a living vein. I climbed anyway. Each step ascended into deeper distortion. The walls around me twisted, stretching into impossible angles that elongated the shadows until they reached across the darkness like grasping arms. The pulse grew louder the higher I climbed, merging with the pounding of my heart. I could no longer distinguish the two rhythms. They synchronized, beat for beat. When I reached the top, I froze. The hallway had been replaced entirely. The floor was smooth and reflective, stretching forward into a long corridor lit by a faint red haze. The walls shimmered like polished metal, rippling with distorted reflections of myself, hundreds of me, each one slightly wrong. One reflection smiled when I did not. Another tilted its head. Another blinked out of sync. My throat tightened. The creature was building me from memory fragments, from broken reflections, from the pieces it still possessed. The stranger's voice cut through the corridor. "Do not touch the walls." I took a step forward. The floor reflected my movement, but the reflection beneath me lagged half a second behind. Then it began to move on its own hands, lifting, head twitching, mouth opening wider than mine ever could. I stepped back, but the reflection lunged upward. Hands burst from the floor. I stumbled away, heart hammering as the reflective surface rippled violently. My hands clawed for my legs, grasping at empty air. I pressed myself against the opposite wall before realizing my mistake. The wall pulsed, and a warped reflection pressed through the surface. A half-formed version of me with hollowed eyes and a jaw unhinged. It reached for my face. I ducked, sliding beneath its arm as it dissolved into a smear of distorted light. The corridor ahead pulsed again. A doorway appeared, not one I recognized. A faint glow seeped from inside, brighter than the rest of the hall. The pulse inside matched the creature's rhythm. It was forming behind that door. I stepped closer, slow and cautious. The door rippled like liquid metal, shifting between solid and fluid states. My reflection swam across its surface, multiplying into countless that surged and bent with every motion. The stranger whispered, "If it finishes becoming, you will end." My hand hovered inches from the door. The pulse thundered through the hall. Then the door split open. Light blasted outward, red, white, black all at once, folding over itself in impossible spirals. I shielded my eyes. The light dimmed. When I looked again, I saw a figure inside the room. Not me, not exactly. A version of me, fully formed, standing, breathing, watching. Its skin shimmered with shifting patterns, like memories flickering across the surface. Its eyes were hollow, black voids pulling the air inward. Its movements were precise, controlled. It raised a hand, my hand, and beckoned. "Come." The word wasn't spoken aloud. It was pressed into my mind like a cold blade. I stepped back instinctively. The creature stepped forward, perfectly mirroring the movement. Only this time, it did not lag or distort. It moved with certainty, fluidity, completion. It was finished. The stranger's voice erupted, panicked and cracking. "Do not let it touch you." The creature raised its arm again, palm facing outward. Space bent around its hand, forming spirals of light that spiraled inward like a vortex. The corridor bent with it, pulling me forward. My feet slid across the reflective floor despite my effort to resist. It wanted to merge, to finish becoming me. I forced myself to turn, to run back down the corridor. The reflections along the walls howled as I passed, their hands slamming against the glass-like surface, trying to break free. The floor pulsed beneath me. The creature's footsteps shook the hall. It was chasing me. My lungs burned. The corridor stretched farther. Behind me, the creature's voice. My voice echoed through the walls. Come back, come back. The staircase appeared ahead, but it was breaking apart, steps folding into the walls like melting wax. The house was closing every escape. I lunged. My foot hit the collapsing staircase. The creature's hand brushed the back of my shirt. A spark burst across my spine like ice and fire. The stranger screamed inside my mind, "Break the link." I twisted mid-fall, grabbing the railing as the steps shattered beneath me. The creature lunged downward, its form bending at brutal angles as it reached. I acted on instinct. I slammed my fist against the railing, breaking the wood. A shard splintered into my palm. Without hesitation, I sliced the shard across my upper arm. Pain exploded. Blood pulsed. The creature shrieked. The link snapped. Its hand recoiled violently, rippling like shattered glass. Its form flickered, collapsing inward as if imploding around an invisible wound. I hit the bottom floor hard. Above me, the creature screamed a sound that bent the air and retreated into the collapsing hallway as the house shook violently. Silence followed. The stranger whispered, "You broke its path, but it still carries your image, and it will not stop until you have none left." The house did not return to silence after the creature retreated. Instead, it remained in a state of restless breathing, like a wounded beast waiting for the moment to strike again. Every wall pulsed faintly, absorbing and releasing vibrations that traveled through the structure like nerves firing beneath skin. I stayed on the floor for several seconds, gasping through the pain in my arm, watching the staircase twist slowly back into its distorted shape, as though uncertain whether it wanted to remain connected to the rest of the house at all. Blood dripped from my arm in thin, steady lines. The shard of broken wood lay beside me, stained dark. The wound throbbed, but the pain anchored me. It reminded me that I was still myself, still contained within a boundary the creature could not completely fracture yet. Above, the distorted corridor crumbled inward, its reflective surfaces folding into themselves like melting metal. The creature's final scream echoed through the house in a low, vibrating moan that rattled the window frames. Then the sound faded, dispersing into distant static. For a moment, nothing followed. Then the whisper came, not the stranger, not the creature, a new voice, quiet, smooth, familiar in a way that froze the air in my lungs. My own voice. "You cannot run from yourself." I scrambled backward until my shoulders hit the wall. The lightless hallway stretched out before me, bending in unnatural angles as shadows crawled along the edges like ink searching for cracks. My voice whispered again from the darkness above. "You have already given me shape. The temperature dropped sharply. Frost spread across the wooden floor beneath me in delicate branching veins. I rose shakily, clutching my wounded arm, forcing myself to move despite the pounding in my chest. The stranger's whisper flickered faintly from the walls. "It is closer than you think." My pulse spiked. "Where?" I whispered hoarsely. "Look at nothing directly." The warning confused me until I understood. The creature now existed within distortions, glimpses, partial forms. Looking directly would give it clarity, identity, completion. I turned toward the living room. The entire space had changed again. The ceiling had risen several feet, stretching upward like an expanding lung. Shadows pooled in the corners in swirling patterns. Furniture bent at odd angles, twisting into arrangements that defied gravity. And across the far wall, etched in thick strokes of pulsating red light, was a message written in a script that imitated handwriting. My handwriting. "Let me finish." A tremor rippled through the floor. The air behind me shifted, then footsteps soft, deliberate, mimicking my own approached through the hallway. I forced myself not to turn around. The stranger's warning echoed in my mind. "Do not look at it directly. Not yet. Not until you know what form it wants to take." The footsteps stopped just behind my shoulder. My breath hitched painfully. A whisper brushed my ear, my own voice speaking in a tone I had never used. "You broke the room." The footsteps shifted. Fragments of glass crunched beneath its weight. "You broke the path." I swallowed hard, heart hammering against my ribs. "But you did not break me." The whisper transformed into a low rasp. I could feel its presence towering behind me, stretching upward into a shape too tall to be mine and too fluid to be human. My vision blurred. I clenched my jaw, forcing myself to walk toward the center of the living room without turning. The house vibrated as though waiting for my reaction, amplifying the creature's anticipation. The stranger's voice broke through again, faint, strained, unraveling. "Do not let it claim the room. Move where it cannot anchor." I looked toward the kitchen archway but froze. The doorway had narrowed into a jagged, bending slit, as though the house had folded its edges inward. The walls twisted with pulsing red veins. Whatever space the room had held before was now compressed into darkness, humming with the creature's influence. I turned to the front door. It was gone. Not destroyed, not hidden, gone as though the house had never possessed one. The wall was smooth, seamless, painted in the same color as the rest of the room. The house had reshaped itself into an infinite interior with no outside. My pulse crashed. The creature laughed behind me. It was not a human laugh, not even an imitation. It was the sound of something trying to remember how laughter worked, forcing the shape of amusement through a throat with no voice box. Walls began to bend inward, forming a spiral pattern that led toward the center of the living room. The creature's footsteps echoed from every direction, multiplying, layering, disorienting. "Move." The stranger's voice cracked through my mind, more forceful this time. I ran, not because I knew where to go, but because I knew I could not stay. I crossed the living room, ducking beneath the twisting spirals of warped ceiling beams. As I moved, the shadows shifted in slow pursuit, crawling along the floor behind me like liquid ink. I reached the hallway that led to the basement door, or what should have been the basement door. Instead, the door had become a tall, cracked mirror. My reflection stared back at me, except it wasn't a reflection. Its eyes were wrong. Too dark, too still. The stranger's whisper surged. "Do not touch the mirror." The surface rippled like disturbed water. My reflection stepped forward. Its movements delayed, glitching slightly. Its mouth opened, but no sound came out. Instead, a low vibration pulsed through my bones. It raised its hand. I stepped backward. The mirror expanded, not shattered. Expanded, stretching outward like an opening into a void shaped in my image. Then a second hand emerged from the surface. Then an arm. Then a head. My own. The creature had chosen its new place to gather. The mirror. My heart stalled. I stumbled away, falling into the living room as the mirror projection crawled out, dragging itself across the floor in jerking, puppet-like motions. Its limbs, though identical to mine, moved with broken angles and unnatural elasticity. The stranger's voice trembled. "It will finish becoming when it steals your movement." I scrambled to my feet. The creature followed, matching my motions with increasing accuracy. If I froze, it froze. If I stepped back, it stepped forward. It was learning. The house trembled violently, lights flickering in rapid bursts. The mirror creature accelerated. Its face split into a grotesque smile that widened far beyond human limits. I backed into the dining table. My hand brushed an overturned chair. An idea sparked. I grabbed the chair and hurled it across the room. The creature mimicked me a second too late, swinging its arm as though throwing something heavy. That moment of lag, that fractional hesitation, was the only separation left between us. The stranger whispered urgently, "Break the rhythm, move unpredictably." I forced my movements into chaos, spinning one way, ducking another, staggering sideways in a pattern that made no sense. Even to me, the creature convulsed, struggling to keep up. Its motions grew more erratic, its form flickering between states. Then I sprinted toward the staircase. The creature shrieked, lunging after me. I jumped onto the first step and stopped. The staircase had twisted into an impossible shape, curving upward into a spiraling tunnel lined with jagged symbols that burned with red-black light. The tunnel pulsed, alive with the creature's breath. The stranger's voice was almost gone now, a dying echo. The upper floor is where it began. It is where it must end. The mirror creature lunged again. I ran up the spiraling stairs, plunging into the pulsing tunnel, knowing the creature was behind me and knowing the house was closing around us both. The spiraling tunnel swallowed me whole. Each step upward felt like pushing against invisible currents, as though the house itself resisted my ascent. The walls pulsed with shifting red-black patterns, symbols twisting in and out of existence. They writhed like living veins, branching and collapsing with every heartbeat. Or perhaps not my heartbeat, the creature's. The rhythm had grown so entwined with my own that I could no longer tell where one ended and the other began. My lungs burned as I climbed. the air thicken, vibrating with a dull resonance that pressed against my skull. The stairs behind me twisted, sealing themselves, eliminating any path backward, whether I escaped or died. The house demanded an ending here. The stranger's voice flickered faintly through the symbols. It is finishing what it began. My breath shook. Why here? I whispered. Because this is where you first saw what it wanted to be. A memory surfaced, one I had not consciously recalled. A distant moment on the upper floor. The first night I sensed a presence behind the closet door. Something watching, studying, learning, beginning. The tunnel narrowed until I had to duck. My fingers brushed the symbols on the wall. They pulsed beneath my touch. The house groaned. Something moved above me. I climbed faster. The tunnel opened abruptly into a vast chamber that should not have existed inside any house. A cathedral-shaped space with walls bending inward like the ribs of a colossal beast. The floor shimmered like liquid glass, reflecting the chamber upside down. Floating embers of red light drifted in slow spirals through the air, pulsing in unison with the heartbeat shaking the space. And at the center of the chamber stood the creature, fully formed. It wore my shape, but perfected smooth, tall, balanced with unnerving symmetry. Its face was blank except for faint outlines of features, sculpted from memory fragments. It stood with its head tilted slightly, like a mirror waiting to be acknowledged. When it moved, the space bent around it. I froze. The creature stepped forward. Then it spoke with my voice, a perfected version of it. You came. My ribs tightened. I tried to force a step backward, but the floor rippled, pulling me forward instead. The creature halted only inches away. Its face shifted subtly, forming my eyes, my mouth, my expressions. It was building itself from everything the house had preserved. It continued speaking. I am what the house remembers. Its hand lifted, reaching toward my chest. And what you will become. The stranger's voice exploded through the chamber. Break the memory. I lunged aside as the creature's hand sliced downward, distorting the air where it had aimed. I hit the reflective floor hard. The surface rippled outward in glowing circles of red light. In those ripples, memories appeared. Me as a child, me laughing in a kitchen, me alone in my bedroom, me afraid. Every fragment the house had gathered appeared beneath me, and the creature stepped into them as though absorbing the pieces one by one. It gestured toward the reflections. These are mine now. I rose, trembling. They're not yours. They are what completes me. The chamber contracted violently, pulling the reflections upward into the air like floating shards. The creature dissolved into red light and reassembled across the room, faster than thought. It lunged. I dodged, rolling across the floor. The surface cracked beneath me, sending spiderweb fissures of red energy through the chamber. The stranger's voice pressed into my thoughts, weaker than ever. Break the floor. Break the mirror. Break the place it gathers. I punched the surface. Nothing happened. The floor rippled as though mocking my effort. The creature reappeared behind me, hand extended like a blade. You cannot undo what you made. I ran, sprinting around the chamber's edge. The creature followed in perfect rhythm, matching my stride. The chamber lights dimmed, shadows elongated like like reaching hands. I stumbled against one of the rib-like walls. The wall responded. It pulsed, and something clicked inside me. This chamber wasn't a room. It was a memory. The house had built the creature from memories, and this was the largest of them all, a fusion of everything it had collected. And memories can break, the stranger whispered. Then break it. I turned toward the creature, adrenaline burning through my fear. It stepped toward me, its form flickering with anticipation. I backed into the wall. Show me, I whispered. The wall pulsed, and memories poured into me. Every moment, the creature had watched from the shadows. Every heartbeat it mimicked, every fear it borrowed, every piece of myself I had unknowingly fed it. I gasped as the memories overloaded, burning like fire against my skull. The creature lunged. I slammed both palms against the wall behind me and screamed, not in fear, but in rejection. These are my memories. The chamber convulsed. The walls cracked. The symbols exploded into spirals of light. The creature recoiled violently, its form unraveling like cloth caught in a storm. Stop it, screeched, but the voice distorted, splitting into dozens of broken versions of my voice. I pressed harder into the wall, pushing the memories outward, rejecting them, refusing their stolen forms. I am not yours. Red light burst from my hands. The chamber shattered. The floor splintered into fragments that dissolved mid-air. The creature collapsed onto its knees, its shape melting, splitting, collapsing inward. It reached one final time. Half-formed fingers brushed my wrist. Its voice, my voice, whispered, "If I am nothing, then what are you?" The floor vanished. Light erupted. I fell. Silence swallowed everything. When awareness returned, I lay on the ground in my own house, unchanged, undistorted. Morning light filtered through the unbroken windows. The walls stood still, breathable, real. The staircase was normal. The bedroom hallway was empty. No symbols, no distortions, no creature. But on the living room wall, written in faint pencil, almost invisible in the sunlight, were 4 words. I remember your shape, and beneath them, a handprint, my handprint, but larger, longer, as if something had stretched it while learning how to become me. The stranger's voice did not return, and I was left alone in a house that was no longer alive, but no longer empty, because something in it still remembered, something that was waiting, and something that was not done. The story ends here. Thank you for watching and listening to the whole story. Please subscribe to the channel and turn on the bell to listen to the next stories.